The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Thom Hartmann here with Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back. This is from page 218. The subhead is, If Corporations Are Persons, Why Aren't There Crimes in the Crime Statistics? Every year, the Federal Bureau of Investigation issues a press release on its Uniform Crime Reporting Program, which determines the nation's crime index. It reports crimes by persons, which excludes, strangely enough, corporate persons, even when the corporations have been convicted of felonies. In its entire history, the FBI has never issued a report on crimes by corporate persons, although its reports on crimes by human persons are well-researched and well-publicized. The upshot of this is that when you ask people how most money and property are stolen or how most people are killed, they think of burglars and muggers and bank robbers and crimes of passion. They think of human persons. The reality, though, is that more money and property are stolen by or lost to corporate criminals than to human criminals. Russell Mochaber's corporate crime reporter noted that in 1998, when the FBI estimated robberies and burglaries at almost $4 billion, the cost of corporate crimes was in the hundreds of billions, as it is every year. These include security scams that ran around $15 billion that year, car repair fraud that hit around $40 billion that year, insurance swindles and corporate fraud found on your health insurance, HMO, and hospital billings that runs between $100 and $400 billion a year, 100 times greater than all the burglaries in the country combined. Then there are the occasional really big crimes like Neil Bush's savings and loans scandal that then Attorney General Dick Thornburgh called the biggest white-collar swindle in history, or the actions of banksters and defense contractors that get no investigations whatsoever from either the Bush or the Obama administrations. More people die as a result of corporate activity than because of the actions of deranged killers or overwrought spouses. According to the Corporate Crime Reporter, the FBI reported that 1998 saw about 19,000 Americans murdered at the hands of other people. But that same year, 56,000 people died from work-related diseases like black lung and asbestosis that went unreported by the FBI. And many times that number died from the silent violence of pollution, contaminated food, hazardous consumer products, and hospital malpractice. Much of the human death caused by corporate activity has arguable benefits. For example, the many cancers caused by compounds associated with plastics or pesticides. But the cost of these deaths isn't factored into the unit cost of the products. So there's no financial incentive for industry to develop toxin-free or toxin-reduced alternatives or to use the more expensive but less toxic alternatives that already exist. This is a process known as internalizing profits and externalizing costs. The corporation profits from the toxins, and the public pays for the cancers, both in healthcare costs and lost productivity from sick and dying workers. It's been a standard operating procedure for centuries and was pushed back against for only a few decades in the 1960s and 70s, with the consumer movement that came out of the publication of Rachel Carlson's book Silent Spring and Ralph Nader's book Unsafe at Any Speed. Since the Reagan administration, however, dumping externalities on the public has become a common and accepted practice across the business spectrum. One of the easiest ways to do it is to simply move the toxin-producing or toxin-using factory or process to a country with lax environmental and labor laws like China or Vietnam, so that not only are labor costs lowered, but more importantly, the cost of dealing with externalities like workmen's compensation from injury and exposure and toxic emissions and death in the workplace, so that all those costs drop to zero or close to it. And then there are the big mistakes. In 1998, one of America's largest meatpacking companies replaced a refrigerating unit on one of its processing lines. Shortly thereafter, the detectors it had in place on the line to look for the deadly cold-loving bacteria like Listeria monocytogenes started to react, indicating high levels of bacterial contamination. The company's response was immediate. Carolyn Smith DeWall of the Center for Science and the Public Interest told reporters Russell Mulcaber and Robert Weissman, quote, "Then their studies started coming up positive, so they stopped testing. This company's Fourth Amendment right to privacy blocked surprise inspections by the government." They're a person, right? The detectors were apparently turned off for a full month before the Centers for Disease Control, frantically trying to find the source of the bacteria that was killing people, mostly children, all over the United States, used DNA fingerprinting to track the bacteria that was causing the nationwide outbreak of Listeria back to the plant, provoking a nationwide recall of millions of pounds of the product. But during that month, hundreds of people consuming this company's products were sickened by Listeria, and 21 humans died from it. The U.S. Attorney's Office, according to Mulcaber and Weissman, said, quote, "There was insufficient evidence to bring a felony charge against the company. Instead, the company paid a $200,000 fine and issued an unprecedented joint press release with the Bush administration's USDA that managed to say that the company had paid the fine without ever mentioning the brand name of the product that had contaminated and caused the deaths." This is truly amazing. I mean, corporate crime costs us more and kills more people, and we don't even talk about it. It's amazing. Anyhow, the book is Unequal Protection: How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back.
The Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. It is a beautiful Wednesday here in Washington, D.C. Well, it's going to rain, but otherwise it's a pretty great day. And on the line with us is Congressman Mark Pocan. He is available for the full hour. He will be taking your calls throughout this hour, so feel free to give us a shout at 202-808-9925. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. He is the first vice chair of the House Progressive Caucus, and you can tweet him at Mark Pocan or at his personal Twitter or at Rep Mark Pocan. It's MarkPocan. Rep Mark Pocan, his official one. His website, pocan.house.gov. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
Thanks for having you with us. Last night, I've got a few memorable moments from last night. I thought that now that the father of this Navy SEAL who died in this raid that Donald Trump authorized while he was having dinner apparently with his daughter and son-in-law, the dad is saying, "Hey, what the hell?" And all the evidence indicates that this was a massive failure, and it seems like Trump was trying to get ahead of that. But actually, this is your hour. I'll do my rant in the next hour. What was your takeaway from last night? What did you think of his speech?
Well, there are many things, as you said, we can go. I think the first was just the tone difference, right? I mean, we didn't talk about carnage. We didn't go even a couple days ago what he was doing at CPAC. Suddenly we had the teleprompter, warmer, softer Trump, I guess. So the tone was different in that sense. But if you actually look at all the remarks he said and listen to him, it's still the same thing. It's based on fear, right? Our country, if you came to visit for the first time, you'd think it's a giant, Mad Max episode with a bunch of illegal aliens trying to kill you with the Affordable Care Act, because, that's basically, in a sum, what he did. So he still was on his notes of, building a wall and talking about deportations and singling out people of some religions from this country, trying to tell you somehow there's a high level of crime. And Tom, I think just by the guests he had, people who've been killed by someone who wasn't a citizen, was the implication that, all these people are going around committing crimes in the country, and that's why we have to justify his xenophobia. So I mean,
Well,
I think
that program, that voice program, just absolutely gives me chills because, in the German propaganda from 32 to 35, German media was doing that constantly. In fact, there was a program that they had started where you could call in about your neighbors and report them, particularly if you thought that they might represent a threat to the republic, i.e. were Jewish or communists. And I mean, that was a widespread program across Germany, and the government then had a program that amplified that voice. And, the reality is that immigrants are much less likely to commit crimes immigrants of all kind. And, well, pardon me, I'm going off on a rant
again. Trying to create this false narrative, right, to justify the xenophobia that helped him to get elected with a certain part of the base. And then, just the whole Affordable Care Act, I think his comments the other day that, this is tougher than he thought or whatever, it's tough work, government. It's not just, what he expected when he ran for office, getting in front of cameras and having people applaud for you. And the fact that he's now kind of realizing that. The problem is he's still putting out the platitudes of, we'll make sure everyone's covered and that, you'll stay on your children's plans and all the things he's saying. But those things all cost money. And then when he comes up with, what his answers are health savings accounts and, some of the other things he's proposed going across state lines, I mean, those aren't going to get even close to doing what he's promising. So, that was another thing he came up really, really short on. One of the things that caught my ear, because Wisconsin, unfortunately, Tom, is one of the tests of these taxpayer dollars going to private schools, was he really, sent up the flag that that's where they're going. And that's part of the reason why many of us didn't want Betsy DeVos to get that position. She's someone who spent her entire career attacking public schools and trying to get taxpayer dollars to go to private schools. And the fact that he brought that up, I think, is a really big attack that we have to make sure people are really, really ready for. Because, while there's so many attacks on so many fronts, this is one that I think, if you take away the value of public education, and start making it that they can cherry pick students and money goes to private schools, eventually you're going to destroy public education, which is exactly what some people want to do, right? They want this to be a commodity and they want it to be in the private sector rather than something that we've always understood as a public good for the common good.
Right, and so investment in the future.
I'm really watching very closely as well.
Yeah. The other thing that really struck me was I warned people about this yesterday on the air. I said, when Trump campaigned, he said, you will get to keep your Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. He always lumped the three together. But Republicans historically, it's a two-step process. Number one, means test something so that it's no longer an entitlement, it's now a welfare program. And then number two, cut it. And one of the most effective ways to cut it is to stop running it as a federal program, block grant it to the states, and then slowly decrease the amount of the block grants. And of course, those block grants don't go up when there's a recession and there's more demand for whatever that service may be, whether it's food stamps or Medicaid. And I said, just watch. He's going to stop talking about Medicaid because Medicaid is principally used by low-income people, and low-income people tend not to vote. And so Republicans do not give a rat's ass about low-income people, and they are going to throw Medicaid under the bus in order to reclaim some billions of dollars to give in tax cuts to billionaires. And sure enough, if you look at Paul Ryan's A Better Way plan for Medicaid, this is from his plan. I quote from Paul Ryan: "We believe states and individuals should have better tools, resources, and flexibility to find solutions that meet their unique needs." And here's the quote from President Trump's speech last night: "We should give our great state governors the resources and flexibility they need with Medicaid to make sure no one is left out." I would say this was a declaration of war on Medicaid. Your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. And this is probably why, Paul Ryan was smiling so widely behind him, because we know what Paul Ryan really thinks of him. He said it during the campaign. Now we've got the new, Paul Ryan with the I love Donald Trump tattoo. So, he's got a little different approach on things.
Yeah.
But clearly, this is his plan, right? This isn't something necessarily that maybe was the first priority of Donald Trump, but it's a first priority of Paul Ryan and the Republicans in Congress.
Well, this is Trump's way of throwing them a bone. And the thing, most Americans, when they hear Medicaid, they think, oh, yeah, working poor. But the other large recipients of Medicaid, and I'm assuming that this would be equally negatively impacted by block grants, are people whose parents are old enough that they can no longer care for themselves, and they need to go into nursing homes or assisted care facilities, or even toward end of life into hospice care. And that's paid for by Medicaid, not by Medicare. And that could go away.
Yeah, there's once you start getting to show what all these programs do, I think the tack they do well on their messaging is the Affordable Care Act. I'll use as an example, but it's the same parallel to what you're talking about. Not everyone is getting the Affordable Care Act, right? 20 million people. So it's easy for some people, it doesn't relate to them personally,
right.
But it really does relate to them personally because we've curtailed healthcare costs largely over the last 6 years because of the act. Therefore, everyone's health insurance didn't increase like it would have otherwise. So everyone has benefited from the Affordable Care Act, and other people do benefit from Medicaid. But if they don't want you to think about that. They want you to look at it's not you, therefore it's not on your priority list. And I've talked to more than 100 or so Republicans who've always, until it affects them, it's not reality. And I think that's what we have to fight on a lot of these issues.
Yeah, it's going to be real for the voters, too. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. We'll pick up your phone calls right after we get back from this break. His website, pocan.house.gov. That's P-O-C-A-N. You can tweet him at Rep, R-E-P, as in representative, Mark, M-A-R-K, Pocan, P-O-C-A-N. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls for Congressman Pocan for the hour. Stick around. And welcome back. Esteban in Marshall, Virginia. You are on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan. Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV on the Dish Network.
Hello, Thom Hartmann and Congressman Pocan. Recently, I wanted to ask a question to Mark Pocan about the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. This is the commission that it's supposed to regulate fossil fuel infrastructure projects, mainly gas and oil. And in its 35-year existence, not once did it ever deny a fossil fuel project because it's pretty much 100% funded by industry. And it only denied a project when the Delaware Riverkeeper sued it for not having denied any projects. Now, right now there's a lack of a quorum, so they cannot allow any more projects until there are 3 commissioners. Right now there are only 2. Now, this is a rogue agency. It needs a complete reformation so it can actually regulate, but it has never regulated, and we don't need it to.
So Esteban, what's your question?
We don't want any more gas
Esteban?
and oil infrastructure projects.
Esteban, we have Esteban.
And, recently.
Okay, pot down, Esteban. Esteban, I'm sorry, you can't hear me apparently, but we only have a minute and a half left, and the congressman, I'm sure, would like to answer your question. Congressman Pocan?
I don't know if I got the question.
Well, let's assume that the question was FERC doesn't seem to be serving the American people. What can we do about it?
I think part of the problem that we're going to have on a lot of these fronts is we're no longer in charge of either House of Congress or the executive branch. So the best we can do is make sure that we're fighting when something comes up on this, but to do a affirmative change to make it a positive development out of it is going to be very tricky. But, we should work on it from the grassroots if it's something that's important to Esteban.
Yeah. Is there any consequential oversight or regulation of the natural gas and of the fossil fuel industry in general? I mean, outside of EPA and
and given the appointments that we just saw, there's going to be very little consequential regulation over those areas. I think, again, this is one, though, where we can find people, real conservatives, not, elected conservatives, but real people out there who look at climate change as something real and realize why we've got to invest in wind and solar and biomass and all the other alternative energies and why that should have an emphasis. Right. At some point, I think we'll build that grassroots movement, but I do think there's great potential on that front.
Yeah, it seems to me that we're building it right now. And it goes beyond just carbon pollution, which is taking down the atmosphere. I mean, there's also
10,000 people a year in the United States are dying from cancers associated with the burning of fossil fuels. And that probably is, a very conservative number, understated by an order of magnitude.
Yeah, this is an issue where the people definitely are significantly ahead of elected officials because elected officials get way too much money from these industries. Yeah. It's hard from them, in some regions where there's a lot of people employed, hard for them to look at this clearly.
Yeah. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. We'll be back with more of your calls for the congressman right after this. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us for the hour is Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls and sharing his thoughts. Mary in Custer, Wisconsin. Hey, Mary, what's up?
Hi. 3 things. First of all,
pick one, Mary. Please
Thompson,
pick one.
Who was our governor before Doyle, got our state into debt. He took away a good school from Appleton, Wisconsin, because he said it was too democratic. So he sent it down to Georgia Pacific, or the Koch brothers own, and they have destroyed the school from Appleton, Wisconsin. I want to know why the voters are not paying attention to Scotty Walker and to what Thompson has done to our state, because now they are really being stupid and voting Republican. My theory is that if Walker becomes our next governor in 2018 again, he's going to rescind everything that he's doing right now just to make him look good. And thirdly, I just want to say this. I wish Wisconsinites would wake up and smell the coffee, or how you say it, to Ronnie Johnson, who has been the worst senator from Wisconsin that has been voted in. Okay. Thank you for your day. I just want to know why our state is being so stupid.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, Mary, first of all, glad you're from Wisconsin. Thanks for calling in. This is something that I think we're going through, as you know, in Wisconsin, but it resonates across the country. Part of it is in the last election, we had 200,000 fewer people come out and vote for Democrats than Republicans. Republicans had about the same totals. A lot of our folks weren't inspired in the same way. But we also have to remember that we had 100,000 more votes in Wisconsin for Democratic people on the ballot for Congress, yet the Republicans have 5 of the 3 seats. So there's all sorts of issues when it comes to our congressional and our state legislative representation around gerrymandering, which is why we all need to push across the country, I think, for citizen panels to draw lines. But also, Scott Walker, a lot of what he did, we're going to see, I think, coming in the next 4 years, and specifically around education. In Mary's voice about what's happened in Wisconsin over education. When I first got to the state legislature, now almost 20 years ago, they just put the plan in place. It was a dismal failure to begin with. As they started putting in some improvements, they really don't have accountability. I mean, it's really about tax policy, giving breaks to people who already send their kids to private schools, and it does nothing to have any educational outcomes that are better than public schools. But it does take resources away from public schools, especially when it comes to cherry-picking kids with disabilities and kids who may be acting up, never get taken into these other programs. And the public schools are picking up the costs. And in the end, this is an effort to really privatize the school system. So her comments about Scott Walker are dead on. And this is something I think you're going to see with Betsy DeVos, because she dumped a ton of money into Wisconsin. Her lead political strategist is a formerly indicted speaker from Wisconsin, who's now making sure every state does what Wisconsin's doing. This is really important to pay attention to.
Anna Maria in Decatur, Illinois. You are on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan. Anna Maria? I think we just lost her. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Pocan, and thank you for stepping up in the absence of the beloved Bernie. I'm echoing kind of Mary's thing. I live in Iowa, and they're following in Wisconsin's footsteps in a lot of ways. But my main concern is at the federal level today, and that's H.R. 610. What is coming up? My daughter's a teacher, and she Facebooked me and told me about this. Could you familiarize me with this?
Could you? I don't know every bill by number. I apologize. What the bill is about?
I believe it's H.R. 610. It has to do with voucherizing, or it has to do with school vouchers in school.
This would be a so-called school choice bill?
I believe so.
Gotcha. So I think I'm not sure which bills they're moving forward. What they've done in the past in this area has been an amendment to make funds portable to private schools when we did the reauthorization that we just did last year for K-12 schools. And they pulled the amendment back because they didn't even want to take a vote because they knew it was somewhat volatile. But now they're going to move full force in this area. So whether it's through a bill or it's through some other vehicle, they may try to take this forward. The important part to note is that in Wisconsin, the last expansion we did of this program, and they say it's because of educational needs, right? First of all, we have really strong public schools in Wisconsin with great outcomes. But of the people who got the funding that when they expanded in the last time in Wisconsin, 79% already attended the private school. So it wasn't about trying to give someone a better educational opportunity. It was about tax policy for those already going to those schools and trying to support them. The problem is we've got terrible outcomes when it comes to these schools, especially around not having records. So I went and visited South Division High School years ago in Milwaukee. It's a tough area in Milwaukee, about a 50% graduation rate. But when they get a kid in from one of these schools, there's no records that come with them. So they've got to start all over and assessing and trying to figure out where that child's at, because the basic requirements that are there for public schools don't qualify generally for these schools. And that's part of why there's no accountability, much less the fact that there's not teacher standards and all the other things that we've had a GAO study already say that, and they're doing another one right now. So I think this is really one of the key areas, because I have seen it front and center now over 20 years of my career. And if they start to try to take this at the federal level and open this up in more states, it will have a devastating impact on the middle class and those aspiring to be in the middle class who go to public schools. And eventually you'll have separate systems, and that's the opposite of what we should be about.
Yeah. To what, we just have a minute to the break here, Congressman, not enough to bring a caller in. To what extent do you think that Betsy DeVos is going to actually have the power to change things at the Education Department?
Well, I'll tell you, this is her only priority, right? I mean, if you talked about higher education, she didn't even understand higher education law as she was coming up for confirmation.
Right.
But this is her passion, and this is what she puts her money in. And therefore, I think it's going to be a secretary coming in that has a lot of jurisdiction that only cares about one thing. And I think she's going to put all of her time and attention to it.
Yeah. So does that mean that she will be effective? I mean, can we expect to see school vouchers coming nationally? Is this the sort of thing that has to be done on a state-by-state basis? Isn't most education policy done by the states?
I think but what they'll do is they're going to allow states greater ability to do it, so you can do what Wisconsin did. And if you can start taking your federal dollars and allowing it to happen, the slippery slope.
So the key is authorizing the use of federal dollars for private and religious schools.
Exactly, and through like the title funds and other things that we've done in the past.
Right, and Trump called out
big business.
I'm sorry. Okay, we'll be right back. Congressman Mark Pocan with us. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with Congressman Pocan right after the news here at the bottom of the hour. Stick around. One of the things that I wanted, at least it was announced that the Nobel Prize for Economics was given to Oliver Hart and Bent Holstrom on contract theory. And there's, two kind of interesting things about this. The first is that there is really not a Nobel Prize in economics. Alfred Nobel never envisioned that. The foundation that he created to award the Nobel Peace Prize does not give out a prize in economics. It was created by a bank in Sweden back in the day so that they could give a Nobel Prize, in quotes. It's really the Nobel, it is the prize in economics in memory of Alfred Nobel, right? Not, I mean, he's dead, so you can't unauthorize it. Long dead. He's the guy who invented dynamite, TNT. And so, you know, it was originally created to be able to give a nice sounding prize and some credibility to what is today known as libertarian economics and supply side economics and right-wing economics and Republican economics and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, typically it's been used, it's been, you know, pretty much politicized. But here's what's interesting. This year's economics prize in memory of Alfred Nobel, and it's interesting, the only news agency that I've heard actually accurately report that, by the way, the actual name of the prize was NPR, for what it's worth, and me. But what they gave the prize for was a couple of guys who pointed out that privatizing things is stupid. That privatizing things, when they are appropriately part of the commons, they are appropriate functions of government, actually works to the detriment of both the government and the people. Doing what Bill Haslam wants to do in Tennessee. Doing what a Republican governor in Michigan did back a decade and a half ago or so. Doing, you know, what Republicans all across the country have been, you know, plugging and pushing and hyping. Privatization. Doing what Gary Johnson talks about. This is, actually, it's kind of a, he throws it out as a, you know, privatization is always better. But clip number 2, Danielle, here's Gary Johnson talking about this. Listen.
Should President Obama's health care plan be repealed? Yes.
Gun control sounds terrific, but at the end of the day, I think it makes this country less safe.
Minimum wage is much to do about nothing.
I look forward to that one.
Just like every aspect of life, private can do it better than public.
I do advocate eliminating income tax, corporate tax, eliminating the IRS.
I don't know exactly what you mean by that.
Yeah. So they've intersliced Bernie kind of commenting on Gary Johnson. This is from the Democratic Coalition Against Trump, this video. But this is The Guardian Larry Elliott in The Guardian wrote a piece about this so-called Nobel Prize in economics. And he writes, this matters because there are too often conflicting forces at work when a government decides whether it should run its own services or whether it should privatize them. Improvements to quality and cost reduction. Hart's work, and he's talking about Oliver Hart, one of the 2 economists who won the prize. Hart's work shows that if the government's main priority is to improve quality, it should retain control, since private providers usually have too strong an incentive to cut costs. This can result in an unacceptable drop in quality. One example cited by Hart was the U.S. prison system, where a paper written almost 2 decades ago expressed concern about these in private hands. The U.S. government now accepts that conditions in privately run prisons are significantly worse than those in publicly owned and has decided to end their use. So our own federal government is figuring out, 40 years after Reagan first proposed essentially privatizing everything, and Gary Johnson is continuing that mantra, as are Paul Ryan and the institutional Republicans. And there's no doubt there's many areas where Donald Trump would say privatize it too, although he has broken with the Republican Party, which I find is fascinating, to say I'm not going to privatize Social Security or Medicare. Trump got this is an important thing to remember. Trump got the Republican nomination by taking Democratic Party positions, opposing free trade deals. Every single free trade deal that's passed Congress has been opposed by a majority of Democrats in the House, opposed by a majority of Democrats in the Senate, and supported by a majority of Republicans in the House and a majority of Republicans in the Senate. You wonder why Paul Ryan is upset with Donald Trump? Donald Trump wants to maintain Social Security, and he wants to he wants to kill the trade deals. These are Democratic positions. In fact, these are positions that Hillary Clinton is taking. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton on the same side of the issue. And it's making the Republicans crazy. And now you've got a couple of guys winning the Nobel Prize pointing out that Paul Ryan and the institutional Republicans are completely wrong on this. That doesn't make Trump right. Trump just knows what the people want. He's pushing that button. I mean, it doesn't mean that he's truthful about what he's going to do. After all, he is a Republican. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us, Congressman Mark Pocan for the hour, taking your calls. Congressman, you're still with us?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Patrick in Marshall, Virginia. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello.
Hey, Patrick.
Hey, how are you doing?
Great.
You had mentioned gerrymandering, and, experts say that it could be 10 years or more before the Democrats are able to gain a majority in the House and Senate again. My question is that a real threat, and is it time for us to break away from this two-party system?
Well, let me address the first part, because I think that there's the most I can offer on that, which is gerrymandering is something we absolutely have to address, and there are ways you can do it before a 10-year out period. It's going to happen again after the 2018 cycle. Whoever's in charge after that election cycle in states will be drawing maps for the 2020 new set of elections. But states like Iowa and California and in some other areas have a citizen panel where instead of having politicians draw the lines selecting their voters, they actually draw the lines based on all the demographics we're supposed to follow and the various rules we have to follow, and because of it have much more competitive elections. The problem when you have the gerrymandering, what happened is the 2010 election when so many Republicans won over 70 seats in the House and Senate, and I think it was like 600 or 700 in state legislatures just in that one cycle. That was right before the redistricting process, and they gerrymandered all these states, and because of it, they have these strong majorities. So it's difficult in a state like Wisconsin right now to win back our legislature, but even in Wisconsin, we won in some courts on this because they went too far, as they always do, and there's a chance to get those lines fixed right now. So I say this has to be a priority as we go into a 2018 election. Whoever wins in state legislatures and in Congress in 2018 will largely make the decisions that are going to affect us for then the next decade. So we're already in the middle of this decade with the lines we have. Some court challenges have been successful, but this is an issue. It doesn't matter if you're a DNR or an I independent. No matter what, you shouldn't have politicians deciding who their voters are. It should be the other way around.
Yeah. And this happens at the state level, right? There's no
state level, and they draw the federal lines at the state level as well, although generally there's a great bit of letting the federal officials draw the lines, and then the state generally accepts it unless there's a divide in government in that.
But this is why the Koch brothers have been pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into the state races to seize the state houses. Plus, when they get 34 state houses and governorships, they can call a constitutional convention and embed permanently into the Constitution that rich people have, the right to own politicians and right policy that right now is just a Supreme Court given right.
And we're not that many states away from that.
Yeah, no, we're at 32 right now. This is one of the reasons they were fighting North Carolina so hard. That was going to be their 33rd. Anyhow, back to callers. Dave in Crown Point, Indiana. Dave, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, I was wondering if he's responsible, if he's heard about the filial responsibility laws. I guess they said dates back to 16th century England, and 30 states or 29 states in Puerto Rico have them on the books where the children are responsible for their parents' medical bills. So if your parent gets in a nursing home and Medicaid goes by or Medicaid won't cover it, their children are, in those 29 states, are liable or could be held liable. Right now, they aren't pushing it, but there's the people are more and more looking at the courts to where the nursing home or your provider or whoever can go after the kids' money to pay for their parents.
Dave, I have not seen something. It doesn't mean there hasn't been something introduced, but I have not seen it as a major initiative yet. But you're right to have the reaction that you do, that this is something that would fall exactly in the lines of people who are basically wholly owned by corporations. So it's something for us to watch, and I will make sure that I take a little extra dive to see if there's anything out there.
Jay in Cantonment, Florida? Jay, listening on Sirius XM?
Cantonment. I'm sorry.
Cantonment. Thank you. Hey, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, how you guys doing? I just wanted to ask a really good question real quick about about what Trump is doing. I apologize about that. About what Trump is doing about the veterans. Is there anything that he's going to take away? Anything that he's going to do to make life better? And is it going to affect us in the future, or is it going to affect us now? That's my only question. I just want to know because I haven't seen anything.
Well, a great question. Thank you for that. So two things. Last night, he said that he was going to invest more into veterans, but as we know, the devil's in the details, so we have to figure out what that means. The thing we do know that the Republicans have been trying to do is take advantage of the few parts of the country where the VA system has had some problems, and they've tried to capitalize on that. So we already have these bills where if you live a certain amount away that you can go to a doctor that's outside the system, and all these efforts to really try to privatize the VA system, which would be a terrible, terrible idea. The VA system generally is extremely sound. I know in Wisconsin we had some problems with opiates in the Toma facility, but other than that, you go to the Madison facility and we even do transplants and everything. They're very high level. People get great service. I've told the story before on your program, Tom. Even my Tea Party uncle from Colorado, who will tell me for hours all the terrible things the federal government does. At the end of the list, he says, "But leave my VA alone." So this is something we have to be careful of because they do want to make it just into the private sector, and they do want to dismantle it. And they say they do it in the guise of a choice, right, allowing you to have a choice of your physician. But we owe more to our veterans to keep that system as solid as possible. So while he offered that he was going to do more last night for them, had absolutely zero specifics on that, I'm more worried about the reality that we've seen them try to do, which is really take away the health care that we owe people who serve this country.
Yeah, amen. I just accidentally dumped one of our callers. If that was, whoever that was, my apologies. Please call right back. I hit the wrong button. Helen in Ithaca, New York, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, good afternoon, Thom Hartmann and Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Helen.
I want to thank you both for the good work you do. Looks like we had a lot of work to do, so please keep it going. I have a question. As far as Congressman Pocan, what is your opinion about, all right, we know that Perez won, the head of the Democratic National Committee, and then he appointed Ellison, representative from Minnesota, as his deputy. Will Congressman Ellison still be able to represent his district in Minnesota, or does he have to, resign from that?
Well, and I have a question to add on to that. The deputy chair does not appear on the organization table of the DNC. Was this a purely ceremonial position, or is Keith Ellison going to actually have responsibilities? Thank you, Helen.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. And let me address, Tom, your question and Helen's kind of, if I can, together. I was one of those people that was a very strong Keith Ellison backer. Tom Perez, quite honestly, was probably my favorite cabinet secretary. I worked very closely with him on labor and other issues, and he is a progressive. He's not a movement progressive per se, but he is a progressive. He was probably the most progressive member of the Obama cabinet. The fact that when he won, my biggest concern all along was how do we take the movement that's out there right now and bring it into the party where you've got organization across the country in every single corner. My hope is that Tom Perez will do that, and I think it was a good signaling that immediately he went to try to include Keith Ellison. And to Keith's credit, who is an amazing person, he last night brought Tom Perez as his guest to the speech with President Trump. I think we're trying to have the unity coming out of it, and I hope that this means we're going to take and listen to the grassroots as the party goes forward. Specifically, Helen, he does not have to leave Congress, which I'm very, very happy about because he's the co-chair of the Progressive Caucus, and I talked to him on the floor this week. We've got a lot of plans to actually start getting around the country. We're going to build this movement from the progressive perspective, and that will happen, so I'm glad that Keith will still be there. And, Tom, to your question, I think there is nothing in the bylaws. So I think this week they're trying to figure out exactly what the position is, and I did have that conversation with Keith. My main takeaway on this is Keith Ellison is back in Congress with a raised profile, with a solid progressive record, who's one of the most energetic and inventive, I think, people here. And we're going to build the progressive movement even stronger with him here, and I think in the end it's a win.
There you go. Okay, Congressman Mark Pocan is with us, taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan right after this. You can reach him. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan, and MarkPocan, and his website is pocan.house.gov. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment.
And welcome back. McWayne in Chino Valley, Arizona, watching us on Free Speech TV. McWayne, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, Congressman Pocan. I'm wondering if you might have an explanation for the Republicans' worship of extreme wealth and power and the military, and if you know how many of the children Navy SEAL Owens killed before his heroic death.
So I hopefully I'm answering the question correctly, McQueen, for you. But I think what you're asking is, on the GP in general, why is it that they have this penchant for one, worrying most about the top 1% and 2% rather than the rest of us, including their constituents, and two, the buildup of the military that they are kind of continually trying to put forward. On the wealth side, I mean, this is something where this is the people who fund their campaigns. This is the people lately who run for office. I mean, it used to be people bought hobby farms. Now they run for Congress, right? So half of my colleagues are millionaires here. And not saying that you can't connect if you're a millionaire, but many of these people don't connect because their heads are in a different place. When you think about Trump Tower and Mar-a-Lago, very different than the rest of the country. So it's just, that's the funding that they get to keep them in power. It's part of their coalition, and that's why they make sure that they deliver a return on that investment by those people. On military, a lot of it is, I think, a lot of the industrial military complex, and especially the companies that make a lot of these weapons are very profitable companies, and a lot of people make a lot of money, and they put a lot of money into campaigns. Goes back to that again, right? The same issue. And the fact that they want to put all this money in right now at a time that, we finally were getting some benefits out of not having as much money. And, the Progressive Caucus has long had stances that, would not only reduce the amount of money we spend on defense, but do a whole lot of other things like auditing the Pentagon, reducing some of the base Pentagon spending so we can, finally start moving in the right direction. And this takes us exactly counter to doing that. So I think, a lot of almost any issue you look at, you follow the money. And in this particular case, whether it be the wealthiest who put the money in or the military budget that they increased for the companies that put a lot of money into campaigns, it all goes back to that.
Could there be, we just have a minute to the break here, could there be a psychological component to this, too, that in fetishizing great wealth, they're essentially echoing, John Calvin, the Calvinistic worldview, which is the epicenter of that, of course, is Grand Rapids and the DeVos family. But, well, actually, I don't know if the DeVosses are Calvinists, but, the headquarters of the Calvinist churches in Grand Rapids, I was born there, I'm familiar with it. And that theory is that, we have to have leaders who are blessed by God. How do we know who God blesses? Oh, rich people, they must be blessed by God. So that would be why they're worshiping riches. And then worshiping the military. John Dean has been on this program many, many times over the years talking about the authoritarians. He wrote this book, Conservatives Without Conscience, that there's this authoritarian mindset that wants to follow an authoritarian leader.
I think both of those are the natural impulses that make them more inclined to those positions, but have those groups not put money into the campaigns and fund them, I'm sure they wouldn't be at the same level of attention they're getting.
Yeah, they would be more marginalized.
Yeah, makes them predisposed, let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that John Dean said that it's 20 to 30% of the population are authoritarians. A fraction of that are authoritarian leaders, the majority of them authoritarian followers. And the Calvinist thing, I mean, that's infecting even mainstream megachurches and stuff. This old prosperity gospel. It's totally bizarre. Anyhow, back with Congressman Mark Pocan right after this. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Clifton in Roscoe, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, I am interested in infrastructure. After watching President Trump speak last night, they and the Republicans and Mr. Trump, they would like to build infrastructure. Now, traditionally, infrastructure has been handled by public funds, which are funds of we the taxpayers. And I've always had a question as to why they would want to involve private industry, private companies who are out for profit in that process to do infrastructure. Because if they do, it would seem to me that the private companies are only in it for profit motive. So therefore, we the taxpayers would pay more in some way, shape, or form. And I'd like to know your thoughts on that, Congressman.
Clifton, dead on. That's our problem. We all, if the infrastructure package is investing in roads and bridges and schools and broadband infrastructure and things like that, we would be very supportive. We put public dollars there, create good family-supporting jobs, reinvest in our country. We would be inclined to support the initiatives they have. The problem is you heard the same language I did in public and private investments. So I think they're trying to do is claim they're creating jobs without putting any real federal resources in, because that would require tax dollars, and they want to lower taxes on the most wealthy in this country. And instead, they're going to trade off probably some things that we wouldn't want to trade off by allowing those private funds to do some of the infrastructure building. So one, it means you're not going to have a real infrastructure investment like we had when we had the Recovery Act, and I wish we had even more of it at the time. But two, you're going to now take some of these public goods and public services and perhaps put them into the private realm, and you're going to be paying for it there rather than paying through it with tax dollars, just so those wealthiest get a break. So I think one of the things you're going to see when the Progressive Caucus puts out its budget, Tom, in a few weeks, a real serious investment in infrastructure so that we can have a real serious contrast of what packages are, because I think that the public supports reinvesting in our country, and they want everyone to pay for it, and I think that's not part of what Trump is putting out there.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, we know, for example, the Eisenhower interstate highway system has returned, somewhere between 100 and 10,000 times its original cost, and just in terms of added tax revenue, depending on whose numbers you're looking at and which year you're looking at it. We know that the GI Bill, just the college part, returns $7 for every dollar invested in educating people. So presumably, if they're going to go to private corporations and say, you put up the money, two things are going to happen. Number one, those private corporations are going to monetize these things. In other words, yes, we'll build you a road, but it's going to be a toll road, which means, number two, that over time, the private corporations are going to get that 100% return, 1,000% return, 700% return, rather than us. And number three, that those private corporations are not going to be interested in doing infrastructure that doesn't immediately produce those returns. So you're not going to be seeing things like reclaiming wetlands or, whatever. It's going to be stuff where you can easily exchange it basically privatize the commons and turn it into a money machine.
Absolutely. You said it perfectly.
Okay, thank you. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, hi. Except for Thom Hartmann's lone voice, no one has spoken out about Rubio destroying the risk corridors, which is the real reason why Obamacare is dying. Rubio didn't do anything directly to stop Obamacare. He made the American people spend billions of dollars out of their pockets to suffer, to make them think that Obamacare didn't work. Is there anything to do to restore those risk corridors, or are we going to go another path?
I think it's pretty clear last night, Bill, that they're going to go a different path, and the path they're going to go is going to give lip service to if you have a pre-existing condition, you'll be able to get affordable health care. But from what we're hearing in the various provisions that have been leaked, et cetera, they're talking about things like buying across state lines. They're talking about things that like health savings accounts. Again, if you have money, that's good for you. They're talking about things that'll be tax policy as opposed to direct subsidy. So again, it's going to make it difficult for those on the lower income spectrums to actually get health care. So while I completely agree with what you're saying on some of the problems that were the poison pills put into the Affordable Care Act, especially in the Senate side, I don't see this Congress fixing that. I see just the opposite. I see they're having a hard time right now finding a replacement, but they're going to put out something that's not going to be at all close to it. And we're going to have to make sure people understand. You have the diamond standard with the Affordable Care Act, maybe not full diamond, but a decent diamond. And then you have cubic zirconia that they're going to put out there that's going to look like it. In the end, if you really want health care, we'd do Medicare for all, and we could simplify the whole process. But that's clearly not on the table in the next few years.
It would also save us $504 billion in lost in recovered administrative costs and profits. It's amazing.
Think how much of that could be spent at Mar-a-Lago.
Denise in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Congressman, for all of your good. Congressman, in terms of the cross-checking and even the gerrymandering, why was there no one on the watch that could say when it was happening in the red states, this is happening, we need someone here to stop it, and what's the future goal so this won't happen all over again?
Denise, I'll tell you what happened, at least from my experience in Wisconsin. I can't speak for every state, but I think I can speak in general on this. It did happen. People pointed out this was going to happen, but it's not always the easiest to understand for the media to try to put into a simple story, and sometimes it's not the sexiest sort of subject area. Even when you look at polls, these issues don't always hit the top of the charts because there's so many other issues that seem to get the dominant amount of the news in the mainstream media. So our job, I think, is to elevate issues that are these overriding issues, things like campaign finance reform and gerrymandering and voting rights, because they really are at the core of a democracy and everything else follows after that. So I just think we have to raise the democracy as an issue in order to make it a higher profile for 2018 and 2020, not as that separate issue, which it's often been. But we've talked about it in Wisconsin. We've talked about it other places. The problem is it hasn't always been the top at moving voters because it just doesn't get the mainstream media attention, and that's always a challenge we have.
We have just 2 minutes left. Andy in Grand Rapids listening on WTRR. Andy, quick question for the congressman.
Yeah, Congressman. Hey, I'm over here in Grand Rapids, and what Betsy's voucher program come up with is what they do is they give you a set amount of money for each student. That money follows you wherever you go. It could be, internet classes, so you've got elementary kids going to the internet to get an education. You're going to all the religious schools, plus, the public schools. But the public schools are the only ones that have to be tested to see how well the students are for possible loss of funding from the state or closure of the schools. Now, if she wants to bring that national, the way I look at it, the best thing for us to fight them back with is say, okay, you guys want to privatize, give vouchers out to schools. What's going to stop the Muslim schools teaching Sharia law, apparently? So can we actually say she's kind of supporting Sharia law?
I hear what you're saying, Andy. I hate to use their negative tone of things back, even though I know it's a good point that you're saying, right? Show the hypocrisy of what they're actually out there they're doing and saying. The problem is then you're falling into the somehow there's something wrong with being a Muslim. And
well, she is promoting the Christian version of Sharia law.
However, Andy, what you're saying is right, and I'm glad you brought up. It can go to internet schools. It can go to all these other schools. It's not just going to necessarily a private school, but it can go to all sorts of things that aren't really education, and all that does is take money away from public education, where you get the greatest good for the community by having strong public schools. So there are many fronts we're going to need to bring out on this, and luckily in Michigan, Andy, people like Debbie Dingell and Dan Kildee and John Conyers and Sandy Levin and others have been really, Brenda Lawrence, have been really outspoken on sharing your bad experiences with the rest of the country.
Yeah, and Senator Peters and Stabenow.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Congressman Mark Pocan, you can reach him or you can visit his website at pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep Mark Pocan, REPMARKPOCAN, or at Mark Pocan. And Congressman, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Tom. Always the best hour of the week.
Thank you. Me too. We'll see you again. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by EcoWine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, EcoWine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading today from What Would Jefferson Do? A Return to Democracy. I'm on page 109. These are, the title of the chapter is Myths About Democracy in America. Myth. Left to themselves, people would drain the treasury. Reality. They haven't. To the contrary, conservative administrations have. Conservatives are aggressively promoting the idea that democracy is doomed and should be replaced by an aristocracy of large corporations who already largely control the Republican Party because, they say, people are fundamentally lazy and will drain the treasury, simply voting themselves unlimited welfare benefits. This is a slur that is particularly directed against people of color by conservatives in the United States. This myth is especially ironic since the irresponsible fiscal policies of conservative presidents Reagan, George H.W., and George W. Bush mostly created today's budget deficits. Numerous conservative websites promote this myth by quoting Alexander Fraser Tytler, 1747 to 1813, a Scottish politician and historian who allegedly wrote in 1776, quote, "A democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote themselves largesse from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates promising the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that a democracy always collapses over loose fiscal policy, always followed by a dictatorship. The average age of the world's greatest civilizations has been 200 years, end of quote. Given that USA is over 200 years old, that's a rather scary quote. The problem is that Lord Tytler had his facts wrong. At the time he wrote the statement, if he did, Bartlesby simply lists it as unverified, only one democracy had existed for more than a few decades, Athens. And its end had nothing whatsoever to do with people voting themselves benefits from the public treasury. In 1776, when the quote was supposedly written, the world's second democracy was just being birthed and wouldn't take full form for another decade, so it seems on its face nonsensical. Similarly, Tytler's description of the way nations with representative governments would fail is accurate only if you're counting those democracies that are corrupted by the wealthy and powerful to the point that they've become sham democracies and, in fact, have become feudal aristocracies where the feudal lords are the wealthy individuals or the powerful corporations. History and the experience of the world's mature democracy shows us clearly that when a majority of people participate in democracy, even simply by voting for the representatives, they don't vote to steal the wealth of the nation from themselves. Another myth, liberal democratic policies are socialism. The reality, democracy has nothing to do with collective ownership. Conservative commentators love to roll out this myth when people in a democratic society agree to tax themselves in order to provide for the common good. No rational liberal or progressive in America is suggesting that we should, well, actually, let me back up a little bit. It says, in fact, the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines socialism as any of various economic and political theories advocating collective or governmental ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods, A, a system of society or group living in which there is no private property, B, a system of condition of society which the stages of production are owned and controlled by the state. So then it goes back to the book. No rational liberal or progressive in America is suggesting any of these things. Have you heard a conservative complain about our socialist police forces or about our socialist fire departments? Of course not, but they're paid for by taxes. Or our socialist roads or our socialist air traffic control system, or best of all, our socialist military with its strict rules that the highest paid may not make more than 20 times the salary of the lowest paid, its comprehensive free healthcare system and its subsidized housing. Indeed, the military might qualify as the most socialist institution in our government, though I doubt they'd like to be called that by conservatives or anyone else. So why do conservatives incessantly apply this label to programs that don't match the definition? It's because the word has such a negative reputation. Socialist and communist nations have, for the most part, been conspicuous failures, killing tens of millions of dissenters in the process. This is as using the word socialist as in the old Union of Soviet Socialist Republics context. Modern democracy is not collective ownership, but a political system in which the voice of the people is not only heard in government, but is the government. The means of production and distribution of goods and services, except those having to do with the commons, like fire and police, should continue to be privately owned. But just as certainly, we the people must take back ownership of our government. This will remove us from Benito Mussolini's vision of a corporate state and leave us in the radical middle place of a constitutionally limited democratic republic, a modern liberal democracy. Myth. Free markets are nature's way of making the winner fit and strong. It's Darwin. Reality. Darwin's method led to more diversity, not less. Conservative activists love to complain about the dangers associated with the concentrated power of government. Indeed, anybody who's ever spent time in the third world, in dictatorships like the old Soviet Union, or in a repressive communist state like modern-day China, and I've worked in all three, understands how dangerous concentrated and unrestrained government power can be. The real problem, however, arises when there are gross inequalities in the size and difference and power of different entities in a culture. This is true whether the giant party is a powerful government, a powerful corporation, or a vastly powerful individual. In any case, ordinary people can find themselves in trouble without a thing they can do about it, no matter how great the injustice. And it goes on from there. The book is What Would Jefferson Do? A Return to Democracy.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And, in the studio with us is Charles Sauer, the libertarian economist and president with the Market Institute, marketinstitute.org. You can tweet him at Charles Sauer, S-A-U-E-R, or at Market Institute. And Charles, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
It's always nice having a libertarian voice on the show. As much as I trash you, or whatever the appropriate word is. I mean, we can do it with good humor.
We have a good debate.
I think so too. So, was there any, did President Trump send a tingle up your leg last night? Was there any red meat for libertarians? There was certainly red meat for the military folks. There was red meat for the people who want to privatize schools. I guess that's kind of libertarian. What were the high points from your point of view?
So, I mean, from a libertarian point of view, I think that kind of the dominant feature of the speech is something that we actually oppose, and that's the America First principle. One of the ideas, one of the few parts where Bernie Sanders was clapping, right? But this is something that we oppose. And so the good things he mentioned, like healthcare reform and tax reform and school choice, I think are kind of offset by that America First talking point.
Just to be clear about this, and I think most Americans don't realize this, because the hit is that the Republicans put out, and it's not accurate, is, in fact, but I've heard over and over and over, Frank Luntz must have said, always say this. I've heard at least a dozen Republicans in the last 6 months say, Democrats want open borders. They want people to just pour in here. They want everybody to vote, including people who aren't citizens. None of that is true. The libertarians actually do want open borders. You don't want to recognize national boundaries. You think that labor should be able to travel just as freely as capital can. Do I have that right?
I think that that's exactly right. A business owner should be able to hire who they want to hire in order to run their business, and that anything of the government overreaching and saying who they can hire is too large of a regulatory.
So if I decide that I want to replace Troy and Chris here with people from Mexico who are willing to do the same job for $4 an hour, because that's actually $4 a day is the Mexican minimum wage. So if they work an 8-hour day, they can send 7/8 of their money back to Mexico. Then I should be able to do that in your ideal world.
Well, seeing as how
you're not end up ruining our country.
Seeing as how you're saying that their work output, it would be by doing that, you're saying their work output would be equal to somebody that you could pay $4 an hour to do that. that would be a smart business move. And I would say that the board in your companies should, in fact, force you to do that as a smart business move. But the fact is, you can't replace them for $4 an hour. Maybe I value your producers more than you do, but
maybe
I think that they're worth something.
Them for $7 or $10 an hour or something. I mean, they're making a lot more.
What you could replace them for is the market wage, which is more than likely what they're making plus a little bit because they've been here for a while.
But if we did away with the border, the market. My point is, if we did it, and this is the problem. Frankly, and you know, I think this is the real clear example that disproves your worldview on this is the Schengen agreement in the European Union, which says that any member of any EU state can move to any other EU state or country and work at the prevailing prices. And so, you know, you've got these former Soviet states, Poland, for example. I mean, the classic example is the Polish plumber. They actually turned it into an advertising campaign in the UK back about 4 or 5 years ago. You know, in Poland, plumbers make the equivalent of, you know, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's sort of in this neighborhood. Let's say in Poland, plumbers make around $8 or $9 an hour. Okay. In Poland. In the UK, plumbers make actually they probably make more like $20, $25 an hour. Yep. So Polish plumbers go to the UK and they're more than happy to work for $10 an hour, which is driving down the wages of all the British plumbers, and the British plumbers are going, hey, what the hell? And isn't this one of the reasons why we have national boundaries?
I know that you like people to have floods in their houses and lose the value of their houses, but in the US,
it's really important.
We don't like to do that. What we like to do is have families be able to afford these services. So I know
if the family is headed by a plumber, how can they afford it?
Look, if you're going to force me to hire, let's say, a $1,000 an hour plumber, I'm going to say, maybe I'm going to try to do this myself. But if you let markets
outside of the International Space Station, there aren't any $1,000 an hour plumbers.
Well, I'm not. I can't afford a $1,000 an hour plumber. You might be able to afford a $1,000 an hour plumber, but I could afford somebody that is allowed to compete with them and charge me a lower price. So I mean, we allow price competition, and the markets find the right wages. So
you're arguing not only to allow, and you know, basically to do a Schengen agreement with the entire world, let anybody from any place in the world come into the United States and work at whatever price can be negotiated, and you want to do away with any of the regulatory protections right now, if we call a plumber to fix our pipes here, we know that plumber, at least in Washington, D.C., is in all probability a union plumber, at the very least certified by some government agency as competent. You would rather have, correct me if I'm wrong, you would rather have some guy off the street to have the ability to come in and say, hey, I know how to plumb. I know how to do this stuff. Don't look at the fact that I'm using pure lead solder instead of tin.
Look, I want you to have the ability to hire that person. I'm never going to hire that person. I'm going to find somebody that has insurance behind them, is backed by something. And insurance is actually a good reason because some company... Well, that's because you're paying for quality. It's like buying meat from a guy driving down the street in a truck.
So what you're saying is
you don't buy that meat.
Poor people are stuck with crappy plumbers then.
No, that's not true. Again, the market is going to dictate the level here. Poor people right now in the world that you're describing, poor people don't have access to any plumbers because they can't afford your $20 an hour plumber or your $18 an hour plumber. What I'm saying is if you allow in the $10 an hour plumber, now poor people have a choice. They can choose no to the $10 an hour plumber, or they can actually take them and take the risk that's going to bring on.
Which they may not know.
I'm giving them the choice.
All of a sudden, their pipes are full of lead.
Hey, if you think that you're smarter than everybody else, or if the left thinks that they're smarter than everybody else, that's fine. No, but we should give consumers the choice.
My concern is people who aren't smarter. My concern is, most of us don't know anything about plumbing. And if we hired a discount plumber who came in and took some old lead plumbing lines that have been ripped, I mean, this city is filled with them, that have been ripped out and thrown away, got them out of a disposal site, and said, hey, I can do your plumbing at half the price, and I've got the pipe with me. Most people might, can't just look at a piece of pipe and go, oh, that's lead pipe.
Yeah, as long as
you want no protections and no pay ceiling.
Look, there's things people should be able to. Maybe they should be licensed when they drive a cart around Costco, so that you don't run into them. Maybe
You're
they
being
should be
facetious. You're making my point that you don't want regulation.
No, I don't want regulation because when you look at the point is, where is the line? Where
right.
do you want regulation?
I get your argument, and let me just give you your argument, okay? Let's say we have now changed.
Put it on my tote board.
We have now changed the laws of the United States. Anybody from any country in the world can come to this country and they can practice any profession they want, right? You know, you got some smart guy in Vietnam who's been mopping floors in the hospital there, but is picked up enough to think that he knows how to do brain surgery. He can come to the United States and you can hire him to deal with the glioma that you've got, right? So now the logical and obvious consequence of all this, that we have no regulation on professions and we have no limits to who can come into the country. The obvious major side effects, setting aside all the, oh my God, I got lead in my water and I've got a plumber, doing brain surgery on me. The more obvious side effect is that it's going to drive down wages right across the board. You drive down wages, you're driving down aggregate demand. The aggregate demand is what drives economies. How does that not kill the economy of the United States?
This is It's fun that we went from well, no, it's a great question. I mean, this is kind of the cornerstone of, I think, the economic debate that we've been having for the last couple of decades. You just asked, is it Keynesianism or supply side economics? And
Adam
I think
Smith,
that everything that you've proposed makes it more expensive for families to survive. What I'm doing is trying to make it cheaper for families to survive.
Also means that families have higher paychecks.
Yeah, except for the higher paychecks still can't buy anything because the paychecks don't. What my math does is say I'm going to give them an opportunity for a job, and they can they can spend that money on what they want. And you're going to say I'm going to take away the products that they can afford, and then somehow they're going to magically be able to afford them. Look, I want to give people the job all the time. I want them to be able to work.
How do you deal with the collapse of aggregate demand? How do you deal with the collapse? Wages are what drive the economy. People use their paycheck. Typically, people who are making under $40,000 spend 100% of their income. The average American family now, 50%, in the 50th percentile, cannot afford a $1,000 loss. I mean, it will wipe them out. So we got a lot of people who are living right on the edge, and you're coming along saying anybody can compete with you, but you too can hire a plumber to do your brain surgery. How does that, this drives down wages, it drives down the amount of money circulating in the economy. How does that not kill our economy?
Well, first off, what we didn't mention was the demand for jobs. Like if I lived in Mexico today, you can build a Trump wall. You could put whatever you want. You could put the science fiction snipers on the wall. You're not going to stop me from coming in because I have 3 kids and I'm going to do what I can to take care of them. So you can't protect our economy from these people. But what you can do is make sure that the families that you're talking about can afford products, that they can buy things that they can afford. And what this ends up doing is building demand for labor. And so that's what you're missing. It's an aggregate demand, but demand for labor increases. How
does demand for labor increase when people stop buying things because they can't afford them anymore?
No, I want things to come in at a price that people can afford. I want things to be able to be made at a price that people can afford.
Not just poor Troy and Chris over here. Sorry, guys. But if everybody in this city's job or everybody in this country's job is going to be instantly replaced by somebody from another country that's willing to work for literally a third of that wage, what happens to the economy when a third of all the buying power in America vanishes?
All right. Now I'm again going to give Chris and Troy a raise. At the same time, if we give everybody in the city a raise from what they're getting paid now to $100 more an hour, what we do is we don't increase demand just by raising everybody's. We end up raising the price because there's a certain amount of supply. But you also
increase demand. If you look at every single, there's been 34 increases in the minimum wage since it was created in 1935. 34 increases. After every increase, if you look at them in 2 and 3 year blocks, because it takes a couple of years for that increase to work its way in, and frankly most of them were phased in gradually over a 2 or 3 year period. If you look at those 3 year periods, what you find is that over and over and over again, every single one was stimulative to the economy. Why? Because it put more money in the pockets of people who make under $40,000 who spend 100% of their income by buying things. That's your aggregate demand that drives the economy.
It's a good way to cherry pick stuff. Most of the times that we've raised the minimum wage, it's not in when the economy's doing bad. It's times where the economy's doing good, right? And so, I mean, talking about that growth, I think
it's been mostly when Democrats had political power. It has nothing to do with the economy.
And I think you've probably said that when Democrats are in power, the economy's doing well. So if we give you that, you can put that on your tote board. But then I get my point that it seems to be that the economy's doing well when we increase the minimum wage. And so, I mean, the numbers just kind of go with that as well. Look, I mean, we can disagree on this. I don't think the economics back me up. But the fact is if you let people have jobs by giving them if you make products too expensive for people to buy, people stop buying the products. If you make jobs too expensive, look, Wendy's just put in 1,000 new robotic tellers.
Yeah, so you've
1,000 people out of jobs.
You're coming back to supply side economics. Yeah, okay.
I mean that's where I am.
That's what I mean. That's Reagan's scam.
If you have I don't think that's actually correct.
Supply side, Art Laffer invented it over lunch with Reagan on a napkin.
Art Laffer has the Laffer curve, which is about taxation, and that was what was done over lunch, and that wasn't with Reagan, but it was done at a hotel down the street here.
Okay.
But the Laffer curve is important. But if we look at supply side economics, it's really just about letting business make choices that are good for them, which is supply side economics.
Okay. So all power to business. Charles Sauer. Okay. All right. I won't put words in your mouth. You can tweet him at Charles Sauer, Sauer. Charles, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And it's themarketinstitute.org.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And I'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. Yeah. Welcome back. There've got to be some good sound engineers and video engineers down in El Salvador or, Honduras has the best, Chris says. Okay. Yeah. And, or maybe, I don't know. It's anyhow, welcome back. Greg in Richmond, Kentucky. Hey, Greg, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thank you for taking my call. I hope you're doing well.
I am. Thank you.
That's great. I'd just like to point out a couple of things. We all know that healthcare costs must be incorporated into the price of goods and services U.S. workers and businesses produce. We also know the U.S. has the highest healthcare costs when compared to all other industrialized countries throughout the world. And the vast majority of competitors in foreign markets where we export our goods and services into for sale, they have Medicare and single-payer health care systems, which gives them an enormous advantage in having lower prices for their goods and services. So my proposition is, if the Republicans are truly serious, and I mean truly serious about free market and competition, why would they not implement a Medicare for all or single-payer system in America so our workers and businesses could lower the price of goods and services we export into these markets?
You're absolutely right, Greg, and that's a brilliant analysis. The reality is that we spend every year $504 billion in overhead and administrative costs and profits purely to maintain a for-profit, bankster-driven, so-called health insurance, corporate health insurance system in the United States rather than single payer. If we went with single payer, tomorrow morning, the day after, we would have $504 billion available to us over the next 12 months. Now, you look back at the Obama stimulus in 2009 that got us out of the great Republican Depression of 2008. You look at that stimulus, and less than $500 billion of it was actually things like construction projects. Well over a third of it was tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. That was the price that the Republicans demanded for President Obama to get it. And it was only a $780 or $800 billion stimulus to begin with. So not only, and that one stimulus took us from losing 700,000 jobs a month to gaining about 100,000 jobs a month. So if we went with a single-payer healthcare system tomorrow, instead of Stephen J. Hemsley being able to buy another mansion or a yacht
And the same for the CEOs of all the big health insurance companies and the more than 100 executives at United Healthcare who make more than $1 million a year. All of them would basically be out of work. But they're so rich, life is good for them. And hospitals could take the literally entire floor of people who are processing claims and replace it, as they do in Canada, with one desk in the hospital that simply takes all the claims and sends them to the National Health Service or to the single payer thing. And saving that $500 billion wouldn't just be a one-time thing. It would be every year. And you're absolutely right. It would lower the cost of exported products. Toyota was thinking about building a plant in Cleveland, Ohio back 7-8 years ago or so. We did a whole thing about it on this program. They were also looking at Alabama and Kentucky, as I recall, or maybe it was Alabama and South Carolina. They were playing these three states off against each other, and ultimately they decided to build a plant in Windsor, Ontario. Why? Because they saw that there was $2,400 worth of health insurance in every car manufactured, and it was just too high a price. And in Canada, it's picked up by the government. It's paid for out of income taxes and corporate taxes. So, yeah, we would save $500 billion a year by doing what you're suggesting, Greg, and we would lower the cost of American exported goods, and American families would do better. But the Republicans won't do that because these big banksters give them a lot of money.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity,
resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
And welcome back. How much time do we have to the break? About 50 seconds. Okay, I'm not going to put anybody on for that because that's just too short a period of time. But this, I think what Charles, God bless Charles Sauer, right? And thank him for coming on the program because he's an honest libertarian. He's at least telling you exactly what his worldview believes. I think it's utopian. I think it's unrealistic. It has never been successfully demonstrated in any country in the world. But he's laying it out. And this is the animating principle right now behind the Republican Party. Keep in mind, David Koch in 1980 ran for vice president of the United States on the Libertarian Party's ticket. His politics, as far as anybody can tell, have not changed consequentially since then. So you look at the Cato Institute, the libertarian think tank, it used to be the Charles Koch Foundation. You look at all these right-wing think tanks, they're promoting libertarian ideology, which you just heard Charles very competently articulate. We need to realize what, the religion that these guys believe in if we're going to be able to push it back. We'll be right back with your calls after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
More of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. If you want to have that, because of the climate crisis, because we are looking at mass dislocation of hundreds of millions, billions of people over the next generation, which will almost certainly lead to wars and crises and famines and diseases. And I mean, some serious stuff is coming down the road as a result of the climate crisis, which, is only gently being addressed, particularly in the United States. In fact, in the United States, it's, quote, still controversial, which is such nonsense. But in any case, he's saying that the answer is to have fewer children. He's like, I'm not going to bring, multiple kids into this world. Life is going to be tough. And I understand that. He says a valuable philosophical contribution here is the difference between making people happy and making happy people. He said, when I feed a hungry person or prevent a harm from befalling somebody, I improve a person's well-being. But when I create a person whom I will then feed and prevent from harm, I make a person who will predictably be well off. And in the first case, I add happiness to the world, whereas in the second case, I added happiness by creating a person who will be happy. See the difference? He gets into this whole philosophy thing and says, I would argue that it is more anti-life to prioritize creating new life over caring for or even not harming those who already exist. Now, one of the arguments that people push back against, bioethicists and whatnot who are saying we should have smaller families rather than large is, you don't want to be in the situation of Japan, where the population is aging and there's fewer people for the workplace. Oh, my God. Well, there's an interesting story this morning about how we can kind of generally, broadly expect that over the next decade, we're going to lose about 5% of our jobs simply because automation is getting so much better. Artificial intelligence, robots, what used to take 10, 15 people to make, on an assembly line is now done with one or two robots. What used to take 15 checkout clerks in a supermarket is now done with one person supervising self-checkout machines. And every day this is, the tellers in banks are being replaced by an app on your phone. Increasingly human labor is becoming less important. And so if we're going to have a 5 or 6% decrease in the need for our labor force, do we really want to be growing our population? I think that, an aging and thus shrinking population like Japan has, like Germany has, although Germany's has changed right now because they're taking all these immigrants in from Syria. But, an aging and diminishing population actually drives up the price of labor. It increases the demand for labor, which increases wages, which stimulates the economy from the bottom up, and which produces a positive outcome. In fact, the best example of this is what happened with the bubonic plague in the 1340s, I think it was, or the 1430s, I forget which, but it was back in the day, right? When a third of the population of Europe died from the Black Plague. What happened? A third of the population, gone. What happened? What happened was the Renaissance. People went from being serfs, from being the property of the owners of the land on which they lived, along with the land. They went from being the property of people to becoming independent men mostly, but work people, workers. And they were able to set their own wages. And in fact, they started forming guilds, what today we would call unions. The Masons came out of that era, at least in a more modern form. And as people were able to charge more for their labor, because there was more demand for labor, because a third of the population was dead, people were able to charge more for their labor. People were able to work fewer hours and have more leisure time. And what did they do with that leisure time? They invented democracy. They invented music. I mean, they didn't invent this stuff, right? But it was like, all this brilliant writing that came out of the Renaissance, the art that came out of the Renaissance, the music that came out of the Renaissance, the cultural transformation that came out of the Renaissance, that all set the stage for the Enlightenment, which was just 4 generations, just 100 years later, coming along again as a consequence of a change in the dynamic between labor and the labor market. It wasn't because a bunch of people died off the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment came about in large part because new lands were being discovered that could be exploited in Africa and in the Americas, and great wealth was being taken back to Europe. It was the Enlightenment, you could say, was this wonderful thing that helped bring about the United States, but it happened because the white Europeans were able to rob, rape, and pillage North America, Central America, South America, and Africa. But it came about as a result of a change in those labor markets. So should we have fewer people? Is that an obligation? Is that an ethical thing to have fewer children?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program.
All the important stories we cover and the issues we care about are at HartmannReport.com. Members of our community can comment and join the conversation. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and our geeky science alert for the week. Oh, no. Yeah, we're going to do that in third hour. No? Yes? Okay, we'll do it right now. All right, here's our geeky science alert. Mother hamsters fed exclusively corn. This is amazing. This all has to do with vitamin B3, also known as niacin. This is, by the way, from Todd Pemberthy, PhD. It is in the Orthomolecular Medicine News Service press release of February 28th. Mother hamsters fed exclusively corn. Now, corn, the way that the corn was processed, it ends up being niacin deficient. Would take their pups, place them together with the stashes of corn they had stored in the cage, and start eating their young. Siblicide, that is pups eating pups, was also observed. Only 5% of the offspring of the females fed corn survived. The rest were eaten. For the group with a more varied diet, 80% of the babies supplied. And supplementation of corn diets with just vitamin B3, niacin, prevented the aggressive cannibalistic behavior. So, okay, you say that's hamsters. What about humans? Well, it turns out, prior to 1942, from 1880, when we started milling and using what were called roller mills, which took away the husk and the germ, and thus did away with the B vitamins. So we got white flour and white corn flour, both with corn and with wheat, and with other things as well. We ended up with a pellagra epidemic. Pellagra is the disease which is a deficiency of niacin, of B3. And over 100,000 people in the United States died from this niacin deficiency just in the southern United States because they were eating this white flour stuff that was not supplemented. In 1942, we required supplementation. So knowing that a deficiency of B3 makes you cannibalistic, this study, this is really interesting. I was just quoting from the paper. This recent published study raises the question of the historical significance of the timing of mandatory niacin fortification starting in 1942. The historical tide began to change from let's see how many people we can kill with all these new ways to kill each other, which is what we were doing in World War I with poison gas and airplanes, and World War II with the nuclear bomb. We changed from that to, I'm sorry, let's rebuild your country. And ultimately, I want my Westie Volkswagen camper. And, they're asking, is this because we started eating niacin and we stopped being cannibals? I find that absolutely fascinating. Okay, that number one. And number two, Jeff Sessions has weighed in on medical marijuana. We did a show about this last week, and it's worth revisiting because he has now amplified and extended his remarks. This has to be the most pug-ugly, ignorant thing that I have heard in months. This is Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, our new Attorney General, speaking about marijuana.
I'm dubious about marijuana. As states, can pass whatever laws they choose, but I'm not sure we're going to be a better, healthier nation that if we have marijuana being sold at every corner grocery store. I just don't think that's going to be good for us, and we'll have to work our way through that. I see a line in the Washington Post today that I remember from the 80s. This one was, if you smoke, marijuana is a cure for opiate abuse. Give me a break. I mean, this is the kind of argument that has been made out there to just almost a desperate attempt to defend the harmlessness of marijuana or even its benefits. I doubt that's true. Maybe science will prove I'm wrong, but at this point in time, you and I have a responsibility to use our best judgment, that which we've learned over a period of years, and speak truth as best we can. My best view is that we don't need to be legalizing marijuana, and we need to crack down more effectively on heroin. And
right. So he goes on, but just yes. Actually, and there have been several studies, and they've been published in peer-reviewed scientific journals, including, I believe, the Journal of American Medical Association. There have been several that I've shared with you here over the years, that medical marijuana or just even recreational marijuana gets people off opiates, including that piece in the New York Times last week that I shared with you about 80 and 90-year-olds in nursing homes getting off opiates by using medical marijuana. Justin in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Justin, what's on your mind today?
Hey, thanks for taking my call, Tom. I listened to your last segment with Charles Sauer and libertarianism, and this is one of the topics that irks me to no end because I see libertarianism ideals. They're pervasive among my colleagues and coworkers and among privileged 30 and 40-somethings. And it really has become a religion, how you put it, because there's no basis in reality, and they forget all of the lessons of the past. Listening to the example of the plumber, and then the gentleman who comes from a different country and wants to be a doctor in the U.S. isn't able to, and charges a lower price. Those are the things that used to happen until probably the early 20th century, which brought around the whole reason for regulating professions and unionization in the first place.
Right. We had these quack doctors. They actually started out calling themselves quick doctors because they use quicksilver, which is mercury, to cure, pretty much everything. And mercury shocks your system pretty well and kicks in your immune system, but it also kills you about a year later.
Well, and we used to bleed out the bad blood.
Yeah.
So
there's actually some science for that now.
The reason that all these regulations came about.
Yeah.
So the idea of libertarianism completely defies the logic of human nature, and it also disregards the purpose of a business. Businesses are not here to be philanthropic and pave our roads and fix our infrastructure. They're here to use the infrastructure to better people's lives, because someone started the business in order to make money, and the purpose is to reduce costs as far as possible so they can increase their profit.
Well, and this is the huge big problem with specifically with Reaganomics. Prior to Reaganomics, the belief was, the understanding, the social contract that we had in the United States that really came into force in the 1930s with the New Deal and held right up until the 1980s, was that a business, if you're running a business, you are responsible to your employees. They are, you have a responsibility to them. You have a responsibility to your community. You have a responsibility to your customers. You have a responsibility to your business as an institution. In other words, to maintain it, to build it, to grow it. And you have a responsibility to your stockholders, right, to make sure that they have. But all five of those responsibilities were evenly balanced. When Reagan changed the rules for executive compensation based on this whole thing that Stephen Moore and Milton Friedman and all these guys were selling, which is shareholder value, that shareholders actually own the companies, and so everything the company does should be focused on amplifying shareholder value. You want the CEO and the senior executives to think as if they were owners, so you compensate them with stock rather than with payroll, and that has the added benefit of they pay half the tax rate that they used to pay for their compensation. When that happened in 82, 83, not only did it kick off this explosion of mergers and acquisitions, but it changed the whole dynamic. It caused the people running companies to say, screw the employees, I'm not responsible to them anymore. I mean, prior to Reagan, if a company laid off 1,000 employees, their stock would fall apart because everybody thought, oh my God, this company is going down the tubes. Now when they lay off 1,000 employees, their stock goes up. Hey, they're squeezing their employees to get more money for the stockholders. So screw the employees, screw the customers, right? Let's start selling disposable crap that can't be fixed. Screw the local community. We'll dump our poisons there and we'll simply move on or declare bankruptcy. And basically everything then, and screw the institution of the company. We don't need no stinking company. We can break this company in 5 pieces and sell them off to 5 other giant corporations, or we can merge it with, AT&T or Time Warner or something and make it, a megalopolis and lay off all the extra redundant, inefficient pieces. And everything is for the benefit of the CEO and the stockholders. And that has brought us to this crisis of capitalism right now.
Well, and the idea of deregulating industries so that you can promote, competition, which would, according to your last guest, broaden the spectrum of choices and allow you to see more competition and better prices in the market. It's totally the opposite. If you have the ability to corner the market and create the only interstate highway that only your business would use to deliver product, then that completely eliminates all possibility of competition because nobody can get in that market.
Well, and that's why Trump's proposal of a public-private partnership is crony capitalism on its face. I mean, it is the purest form of crony capitalism there is. Justin, thank you. Excellent analysis. And you're absolutely right. This is something that is widespread among 20, 30, 40-something white people almost exclusively. Thank you, Justin.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
This whole libertarian religion, it's bizarre. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Bob in Sacramento. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Boy, some of these guests in the last little while.
Well, we want to provide a broad spectrum of public opinion here, Bob.
Well, it really isn't a broad spectrum of public opinion. When you have people like your ex-Navy man, I won't mention his name, but the guy with the crew cut, and some others of that stripe. There's just this pipe dream, utopian nonsense that comes out of their mouth. It's the unifying principle of libertarianism is this nonsense of the non-aggression principle.
And the free market principle.
Everybody's going to all of a sudden be good.
Right.
There will be no bad people, no good people will ever do bad things ever again.
Right, and the theory,
and everything will just be rosy. And
and the theory is that what libertarians say they're opposed to is force, the use of force. Right. And so let's do away with the use of force outside of government defending the country and that kind of thing. But what they completely miss,
blah blah blah,
right? What they completely miss is the most powerful force in the world is not economic or even political. It's biological. If you are hungry, you are not free. If you are homeless and it's cold, you are not free. If you can't get health care and you're sick, you are not free. And libertarians don't acknowledge that sickness is a form of force, that poverty is a form of force, that homelessness is a form of force, and that hunger is a form of force. And we need to be reducing those forces in order to provide freedom to people.
That's a good point. They don't recognize I like to look at money in fluid dynamics because it works on physics principles kind of as a fluid force.
Sure.
And there's a flywheel effect to a large lump sum of money, right? There's power in a large lump sum of money.
Sure.
And if one person has that power, I'm not free.
Or your freedom is diminished relative to that person. I mean, if the Koch brothers can
relative, because freedom is a relative state. It's always relative. There's no absolute of freedom.
Yeah. Well, my point was, if the Koch brothers can, if the Koch brothers can buy a politician, if they can buy a political argument by, whether it's a proposition in California and like the single payer one a couple of years ago. Well, actually, there have been a number of them where they just, come in and rain down money on the state. And this has happened not just in California, but all over the country. If they're using that force, or if they're using that force to buy politicians, to buy legislation, and you and I don't have the means to do that, what happened? That's force. That's the inappropriate use of force. And libertarians are fine with that.
The Kochs now are endowing Cal State University to teach Randian economics.
I know they're doing that with over 100 universities across the country.
Cal State, I went to University of California back in the Reagan days.
Yeah.
And I before he had a chance to completely wreck the university.
Right, back when it worked well and it was free.
It wasn't quite free, but it was only like $3,000 a year, and Cal State was $300 a semester.
Yeah. Yeah. Bob, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. You set up very, very well. We'll be back with Ellen Ratner. We talk media news. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and let's check in with Talk Media News, find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com, and on the line with us, Ellen Ratner. Hey, Ellen.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. Rosie O'Donnell gave well, it was sort of a speech, but it was a rally in front of the White House before the president's speech yesterday. And she said, look at this. It was pouring, so it only had a crowd of about 100 people. But she said, look at this crowd of 1.8 million people. And she said, this is Donald Trump math, ladies and gentlemen. You say it, the media buys it.
Right.
So she was after the media as well. Very interesting. She said she led the crowd in a chant of he lies, he lies, he lies. And it's about time they all started saying that in terms of the media, she said. Instead of it appears that he hasn't been speaking the truth is what she says we say.
Yeah. Well, and it's true. The media's handled Trump with kid gloves. Even in their calling him out of his lies. I mean, 51 lies last night in the State of the Union address. I'm not hearing that as a major headline.
Well, the Washington Post actually did something on each one of his Pinocchios, as they call it.
Right. Right. But
okay. So there was an off-camera gaggle today, not a briefing, but some of the highlights are that the president was humbled by the reception last night. He said he wants to repeal Obamacare and restart the engine of the economy. He also said more people are opting out of Obamacare. This week, actually tomorrow, he goes to Newport News, Virginia, returns back to the White House, and then on his way to Mar-a-Lago, he stops in Orlando for an education event, which will happen on Friday. Today, he's hosting a bipartisan lunch. He said he has a desire to reach across the aisle. Now, this is also very interesting. Marijuana, he says, is a state's issue for the medical version, but not for the recreational version. Is there states' rights or there isn't?
Yeah. And this could get really sticky. You know, I just played the clip of Jeff Sessions saying, you know, he saw.
Weigh in on it.
Yeah, Jeff Sessions saw this article in the Washington Post that people all across the country are using medical marijuana and recreational marijuana, for that matter, to get off opiates. And it works. You can use it to get off opiates. You can also use it to get off SSRI drugs. I know two people who have done that. You know, the Prozac kind of, antidepressants that are so incredibly, insanely addictive, and marijuana is not. And
if you go off SSRIs, I know somebody that committed suicide, and we think what happened is they went off their SSRIs and they got suicidal right away.
Yeah, and pot
this guy
seems.
was a doctor.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about, and in fact, he's a mutual friend of ours, or was before he committed suicide. And it's just astonishing to me that the chief law enforcement official of this country doesn't bother to check with the physicians before he makes medical pronouncements.
It drives me crazy. Yeah. Also, John Christopher Buell was our person today at the White House. He asked Sean Spicer if the president softening his stance on immigration reform in his address last night was something he did from the heart or something he did from the political playbook. Sean said that the entire speech was from the heart. Okay, if you believe that, I have a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you.
Right.
Okay. Now, it is true that the Trump speech got very high marks. However, the Democrats said they wanted to see action. I spoke with several Democrats, and usually they say it was a terrible speech. If it's a Republican, they said it was a good speech, but they said that where is the action? They want to see action. As you know, the infrastructure bill was voted down by the Republicans, but now, of course, they're supporting it.
Right. Nancy Pelosi got $1 trillion infrastructure bill out of the House successfully, and it had more than 50 votes in the Senate, but the Republicans filibustered it.
That's absolutely correct. And so this is interesting. However, CNN polls said 7% of the respondents described Trump's speech as very positive. 21% said it was somewhat positive. And so it got very, very good marks. 76% of the CBS poll said they approved of the address. So clearly the president relied on his speechwriters and did not go off chart as they thought he would, but he did not. He stuck to it.
Yeah.
So I guess that's
I keep saying over and over again, Ellen, this administration is reminding me of Reagan so much. I mean, Reagan lied to our faces about what he was doing. Quietly in the background, he was he was privatizing and selling things off and raising taxes on working people while he cut taxes on millionaires and billionaires. And he told us he was doing the opposite. And you're right, people bought it, and they continue to.
Right. Okay, Congressman Ryan Zinke was confirmed for Interior Secretary today. The vote was 68 to 31. The department manages 500 million acres. Now, Gail Norton was the first Interior Secretary under George W. Bush. They launched a Condor event to show how green they were. And the question is now, what will Ryan Zinke do?
He'll go find some federal land and sell it to ExxonMobil. I mean, that's what they've been talking about doing forever.
When I was in India, we heard that ExxonMobil under the current, former current guy who's now our Secretary of State, managed to kick out another oil company so that Exxon could go in.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. I wonder if there were bribes paid or... Well, who knows?
Well, that's a very good question. So now the question is, how is President Trump going to pay for the increase in the Pentagon budget? He's apparently planning on cutting, according to the Democrats, 37% from the State Department. The Hill reports that he's going to cut the EPA by 24% and dump 1/5 of the workers at EPA. So much for creating jobs.
Yeah. Wow. That's going to be a lot of people in this town looking for work.
I guess so. Senator Lindsey Graham, who, as you know, is no fan of Trump, said the budget was dead on arrival. He was also quoting as saying about the budget, it's not going to happen. It would be a disaster if you take soft power off the table. Then you're never going to win the war. And he's talking about the soft things that we do through the State Department.
Yeah, I mean, basically we've got internationally we have two tools. We have the Pentagon, which can kill people and blow things up, and you got the State Department that can negotiate peace. And what Trump is talking about doing is amplifying the Pentagon and cutting the State Department. And Lindsey Graham is saying, no, wait a minute. There needs to be some kind of balance here. Although the State Department's budget is, it's not even, 5% of the Pentagon's?
That's right. I mean, it's like nothing. And we, the top 7 countries, we have a bigger budget than all of them combined.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really quite remarkable.
It is, and as one of the congressmen was telling me last night, hey, look, how many aircraft carriers does China have? We've got a lot more, and we need to make more?
Yeah, they have 1, we have 8, and ours are...
11, I think they
11? Said. Okay, ours are far more sophisticated, too.
Right, and they have, and we're...
Oh, it's Russia that has 1.
Add more?
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, it's I mean, how much full spectrum dominance do you need? We basically control the world.
Crazy. Yeah. And Mitch McConnell said the diplomatic portion of the federal budget is very important, and you get results a lot cheaper frequently than you do on the defense side. That's Mitch McConnell saying.
Yeah. Now, he's talking about cutting foreign aid, too. Are they going to cut aid to Israel and Egypt?
Part of the State Department budget is foreign aid.
Yeah, and that's
AID moved under the State Department.
$6 billion a year, though, is just going to those 2 countries because of the Camp David Accords. Is that going to go away? Do we know?
We don't know. It also goes to places like South Sudan,
right?
But not much money in comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. South Sudan, which is now experiencing famine in addition to civil war, tragically. And you're doing great work there with goatsfortheoldgoat.com, Ellen.
Thank you, Tom.
Ellen, thanks so much for being with us.
You got it.
We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. With the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from Healing ADD. Richard Bandler, the founder of Neurolinguistic Programming, NLP, wrote the foreword for this book. And it's basically a book on NLP as applied to people with ADHD, but it's actually a pretty good book on NLP, which is actually how I originally wrote it. So we're on chapter 8 on page 80, Reconstructing the Past. Different types of memories, regardless of how anchored in reality or fantasy they may be, are stored in our brains in different ways. These forms of storage involve the 5 sensory modalities: sight, smell, hearing, taste, and feeling, and the subtle gradations of each sense, such as color, brightness, or contrast for the visual modality, for example. These gradations are referred to as submodalities. This is true for both adults and children. One of the ways our brain organizes information is according to the way it's stored. Our senses pick up something in the outside world. Say we see an insect fly by. That's an objective thing that we've seen. However, before that image makes its way to our conscious brain, it's processed by other parts of the mind and tweaked and tuned. If it's a bug that frightens us, perhaps a wasp, then the mind sees it as a bigger object and in sharper contrast than it really is. Other objects in the picture, the background, buildings, grass, whatever, become more distant, dull, perhaps even less colorful. The mind may increase the volume of the sound associated with the wasp and also attach a feeling to the image, probably a variation on what we might interpret as fear or panic, a feeling felt perhaps in the pit of the stomach or the trembling of the hands. So here's a quick list of some of the submodalities that we commonly use to experience reality and store memory. In the visual field, color or black and white. So this is how do you remember things visually? Color or black and white, contrast, size, bordered or not, moving or still, brightness, graininess, distance from us, associated or disassociated. In other words, do we see the scene as we saw it, or do we see ourselves in it? Focus, detail, texture, perspective, dimensionality, is it flat or 3D? Proportion, that's the visual field. In auditory, loudness, tonality, distance, pitch, melody, inflection, location, tempo, duration. Gustatory, salty, sweet, spicy, musty, bitter, familiar, delicate. Olfactory, strong, faint, intermittent, familiar, unique, musty, moist, damp, mildewy. Kinesthetic, the feeling. Hard, soft, cool, warm, sharp, electric, intensity, duration, speed, location. Now here's the amazing part. If you know what modalities and submodalities your mind uses to store a particular type of memory, happy, sad, hopeful, afraid, neutral, whatever kind of memory it is, then you can adjust the memories you have of the past to change their emotional feel. For example, think of something, a memory of something that you did in the recent past, such as brushing your teeth last night. Mentally list the qualities of the submodalities. Your list might look something like mine. I see a still picture in black and white without a lot of contrast or detail. Associated, I see the mirror in the sink, but not myself. No border, 3D, about 2 feet square, about 20 feet away from me. I can hear the sound of the water running and taste the mint of the toothpaste. If I concentrate on it, I can remember, or imagine remembering, the feeling of the toothpaste on my toothbrush on my gum and the smell of the toothpaste. The feelings I associate with the memory are pretty neutral. Boredom might be the best way to describe it. It's something I do every night. Now imagine a control panel just below the image, or wherever you'd like it to be, with levers and dials that you can use to change the various submodalities. Reach out and change a few of the submodalities and see how things change. When I move the picture from black and white to color, I suddenly feel curious and interested in the process of brushing my teeth. It seems fascinating. If I turn up the volume, I become uneasy. As I increase the mint taste, I feel more awake. Nobody knows why this works the way it does. One theory is that the brain stores information holographically rather than digitally, so that the brain sees its own storage capacity as a three-dimensional space. Because we experience the world through our senses, it makes sense that we could organize the mechanism for storing the information about our experience of the world along sensory lines as well. When something is put into a particular space, it acquires the sensory nature of that space, since sensory signals are how we experience the world. So when a memory is put into the boring category in our brain, it becomes, in my case, everybody's different, but it becomes, for me, black and white still pictures and all the other submodalities I described before. When the submodalities are adjusted and the pictures are turned into a color movie, it doesn't just change the memory. It actually causes us to interconnect with or slide to a different storage place, a physical different storage space in my holographic brain. There's also a concept known as a critical submodality. That's the submodality which has the ability to shift others, probably the primary hook into the place in the brain hologram where the memory is stored. As you're going through the various submodalities, changing each one a bit in one way or another, turning up or down the brightness, the volume, you'll notice that there's generally one particular one. It could be anything from volume to contrast to smell to brightness, anything. It causes the entire picture to change and creates a sudden shift in the feelings associated with that memory. That submodality shift is the critical submodality. And once you know what your critical submodalities are, you can do this process much quicker. One of the most common and most powerful critical submodalities is location. When you move a picture from where it is, for example, in front and to the right about 4 feet away to some other place, for example, in front and slightly over your eyes, only a foot away, it often changes dramatically its impact. So it goes from there to talk about how to take memories that bother you or that haunt you even and transform them into things that are simply just who cares memories. The book is Healing ADD, Simple Exercises That Will Change Your Daily Life.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and I am pleased to have on the line with us one of my old friends and colleagues, Mike Malloy, the host of the Mike Malloy Show on the Progressive Voices Network, weeknights at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, author of the forthcoming book, The All Right, Trump and Me, Dispatches from the Foothills of the North Georgia Mountains. His website is MikeMalloy.com, and his Twitter handle is @MikeMalloyShow. Mike, welcome. It's been a while since we've talked on the air.
Boy, that was the longest sentence I think I've ever heard you say. Hi, Tom.
I got to get it right here, you know.
Thanks for having me on. How you doing?
I'm well. So just to begin, I'm curious your thoughts and take on last night's pseudo State of the Union address, address to the joint session of Congress.
Yeah, whatever that was. My take on it is it was very robotic. It had nothing to do with Trump. That was not Trump speaking. I think Trump has made himself very clear as to who he is and what he is and how he relates to the world over the past 16, 18 months. And interestingly, I was watching some of the pundits on MSNBC and CNN today talking about this was Donald Trump reset, or Donald Trump trying to reach out, to people other than his base. And I had to sit there and laugh while I was eating my oatmeal, because it's nothing of the sort. This is just another Steve Bannon move to try to calm down the proles a little bit, because we were getting kind of excited, not in a positive way, but those states of excitation where revolution might be on our minds. So I think that was just baloney last night, frankly.
I see it as Reagan. I remember Reagan really, really well. And I remember all the times that he would say, oh, we're going to clean up the air, and he would cut air regulations. Oh, we're going to clean up the water. He cut water regulations. We're going to cut taxes on working people. He raised taxes 18 times. He cut taxes on billionaires. And he said it so sincerely, and he said it so frequently, and the press repeated it so obediently that Americans to this day believe the lies that came out of Ronald Reagan's mouth on a daily basis.
Well, after spending time with Ron Jr., as you have, as I have, my attitude about President Reagan has slid a little bit in the direction that I wonder how much of what Reagan did he was fully aware of.
Yeah, I agree. He was a useful idiot in many ways. So.
Yeah. Granted, all those things you just said happened. I remember his speeches too. But the difference, I think, the fundamental difference between Reagan and Trump, if there's only one fundamental difference, is the fact that I don't think Reagan had a malevolent streak somewhere buried inside of him, and I do believe that Trump does.
Yeah, Reagan was not a hateful ideologue. He was an actor playing the role of President of the United States and dancing to the tune of hateful ideologues in his staff and in Congress, whereas Trump himself is a hateful ideologue, or at least hateful. I'm not even sure that he's really figured out an ideology yet, which is one of the big problems the Republican Party has.
Well, yeah, and I think that is glaringly apparent. Trump has no program. He has no. I don't think he wanted to be president. He wanted to bask in the glory of winning the election would bring him. But he's not someone who I don't believe he has leadership qualities. I think he's a grifter, a manipulator, a con artist. He got a start. Hell, if you or I had started with $50 million, I think we could be real estate moguls in New York and around the world ourselves now. Yep. So I cannot take this man as anything other than a willfully ignorant person whose ego has to be fed every day, or something bad will happen.
Yeah, he's a total hustler. We're talking with Mike Malloy, MikeMalloy.com. You can tweet him at Mike Malloy Show. Mike, tell us about your project, this book, The Alt-Right, Trump, and Me.
Yeah, that's kind of the working title, Tom. I'm not sure how it's going to wind up, but I had to have something. Well, what have you written? 50, 60 books. You've got to have a focal point. So that's to keep you on track. So that's what I'm using is that particular title. But it's going to be about Trump and the so-called alt-right, the fascist right in this country, but also the experiences I've had over the past 50 years directly with this so-called alt-right, and how it can happen here, regardless of what Sinclair Lewis said in his book. It can happen here, and I think it is happening here. So what I'm attempting to write about is all that has happened in this country since the 60s, focused through me and how it led. I don't mean everything. I mean, this is not going to be an 800-page tome. It's going to be a very quick book, but filtered through my experience and how I've seen this and how I've watched the slow incremental rise of fascism until the point where I honestly, truthfully do believe that we're about 2 inches away from it right now.
Yeah, and you've been commenting on this forever. I've told you before, I used to live in Atlanta. Louise and I started a travel agency there in '83 and an ad agency there in '87. And I used to drive around Atlanta in the evening. In fact, I'd look for excuses to drive around Atlanta in the evening when you were on WSB just to listen to the Mike Malloy Show. And that was in the 80s. I mean, you've been, long before I was on the air, you've been on the air forever talking about this stuff, speaking truth to power, occasionally getting kicked in the teeth by power for it. And,
yes.
And I'm telling you, you're one of my heroes, Mike Malloy. You really are. You do great work.
Now, you know how I feel.
So I'm assuming people can learn more about your book project by going to MikeMalloy.com?
They can learn more about the Kickstarter program that we've got started to help get this thing off the ground. But and they can also learn how they can receive chapters of the book as they're written.
Cool.
But in terms of what the totality of the book is, I don't know right now. You know what I'm talking about. When you start, you don't know exactly where you're going to wind up.
Yeah, and that's part of frankly, the delight of writing a book. But Mike, I wish you the very best on the thing. If you want, or if it's of any help, drop me a private note and I'll connect you with my agent.
I'll do it.
I would be pleased to do that. And I wish you really well with this new book, The Alt-Right, Trump and Me. MikeMalloy.com, Twitter, Mike Malloy Show. Mike, thanks so much for dropping by today.
Thanks for having me on. My best to Louise. You take care.
I'll pass it along. Say hi to Kathy for me. Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with your calls, my thoughts, the news of the day. Boy, what a stack of stuff I've got for you, too. Stick around. And welcome back. John, watching Free Speech TV in Middleton, Tennessee. Hey, John, what's on your mind today? John? John, you've got to listen to your telephone instead of your TV, because there's a pretty long delay from the obscenity filter to the getting it up to the satellite to getting it back down to everything else. So call back and listen on your phone. Jim in Clovis, California. Hey, Jim, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Okay, I just wanted to respond to the economist you had on.
Charles Sauer.
That how out of touch. My wife and I just decided, this being Lent, the first month of Lent, we're going to try to live on minimum wage, which to see what's really important to us and what it's like to try to do that. And just when I made a budget, I realized that it would take two people on minimum wage, and even then, we couldn't afford a plumber if we needed one.
Right.
At any price.
Right.
You know, it's just, and that's California minimum wage, which is $10.50 an hour.
Right.
By the time you pay the expenses of living, our house payment is no more than rent, including the taxes, and with no children, you can't do it.
Yeah, well, this is what a lot of people are encountering as they face retirement too, or as they age out of the job market, they find themselves in their late 50s, early 60s, and nobody wants to hire them, and it's like, and Social Security does not support a person anymore unless they happen to live in the poorest part of Appalachia, and even there, it's a challenge.
Social Security for the two of us being retired, and we've worked all our lives, comes to what minimum wage would be. Thank goodness we have good pensions.
Right.
And some savings.
Right.
But, here it is, March 1st, today we're starting, and I'm ready to give up trying to do it because it's impossible.
Yeah. I'm not Catholic, Jim. When is Lent?
It starts today.
Okay, and how long does it run?
It runs till Easter, I think April 15th.
So it's 40 days. Is that the 40 days that Jesus was in the wilderness? Is that the tie?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
But we just decided, hey, what's really important to us? Do we need everything we have? And we were living quite well. But what is it like? And we both grew up poor, but, it's easy to forget.
Yeah.
And saying, holy, how do people make it?
Right.
And I don't know what minimum wage is nationally. Is it like $7.50 or something?
$7.25.
Yeah. So,
nobody can live on
maybe
that.
less expensive, but, even with government help,
right?
How do you do it?
Right. Well, this is one of the problems is that the cheapest food out there is fast food or crap food. And this is why, Louise and I were skipping around last night after the speech, and one of the stations we skipped to was Fox. And the guy on Fox was saying, well, we clearly have no food problem in the United States. Obesity is huge among poor people, and they're eating like crazy. Well, no, they're crazy eating. They're eating cheap, crappy food because it's all they can afford, and that produces obesity. Mm-hmm. And so and that's a challenge for people on a food limited budget as well, is just plain old nutrients in addition to calories. Jim, thank you for the call, and good luck. If you pull it off for 40 days, call us back, or even a week or two, call us back and let us know how it went, okay?
Okay.
All right. Good talking with you. We'll be back. It's 18 minutes past the hour. Stick around.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Wayne in Eugene, Oregon. Hey, Wayne, what's on your mind today?
Well, hi, Tom. I got one question about Trump's wall. And is it really to keep them out?
Or is it to keep us in?
That's just a thought.
Yeah, no, it's not to keep us in. There's millions of American expats who are living, happily in Mexico right now.
I know that, and there's more going down, and maybe and there's more Mexicans leaving and going down than are coming back.
Yeah.
So I'm just tossing it out as food for thought because I wouldn't put anything past these bastards.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Although the day may come. I mean, I have a friend who lives in Mexico who sent me a note a week or so ago saying that for the first time in her life, and she's lived there for 7 years, I think now, Mexicans are starting to, and she's conspicuously American, she's blonde, although there are blonde Mexicans, but I mean, she's conspicuously an American. And she's like, for the first time, I'm starting to get dirty looks from people. I'm starting to get, discriminated against. I'm feeling the brunt of anger toward America. And she's married to a Mexican. That's pretty spooky stuff. And so if we dump a couple million people from the United States into Mexico, we reduce the remittances going to Mexico, and we take people who are employed right now and producing something, and we turn them into unemployed, poverty-stricken Mexicans. And we're going to damage the economy of Mexico really, really badly by doing this. And the consequence of that will be social unrest. You're going to see the cartels explode. You're going to see more violence. And a lot of that violence might be directed against American communities, American expat communities, because they've got money. And that then could lead to ultimately, such a deterioration in relations that the wall does become a two-way wall. I mean, who knows? I hope not, Wayne. I really hope not. I mean, the clumsy, ham-handed way that Donald Trump is proposing to deal with the problem that Ronald Reagan set up for us is I think, producing a lot of negative, unintended consequences. Wayne, thanks for the call. Well said. Heather in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Heather, thanks for listening to 1480 KPHX. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Two things. I wanted to find out if you've heard about a bill, H.R. 193. If so, are you as alarmed about it as I am?
Is that a federal bill or is that the Arizona bill?
No, it's federal. American Sovereignty Restoration Act. And the reason I bring it up is because I've been trying to fight off a panic attack since last night. I listened to Trump's speech, and there was a part of his speech where indirectly he was calling for us to leave the UN.
Right.
His words were, free nations are the best vehicle for expressing the will of the people, and America respects the right of all nations to chart their own path.
Right. What was that bill number? HR what?
It's HR 193, American Sovereignty.
193? I thought it was 4 digits.
Yeah, HR 193,
193.
American Sovereignty Restoration Act.
Yeah, here it is right here. I've got it.
Because I'm really
This was written by Mike Rogers. Oh, he's one of the hardcore right-wingers, Alabama's 3rd District. And this is not a summary of it. Let me go back and find the actual bill. Here's a PDF of the actual bill. What is your understanding of what this legislation does?
Well, on the House website.
Oh, it's the United Nations Participation Act of 1945 is repealed. It pulls us out of the UN.
Yes, it pulls us out of the UN, and it takes us out of any peacekeeping operations. Basically, no funds will go to anything involved with the UN anymore.
Whoa.
Yeah, so I just wanted to see what you thought about that, and if you're feeling the same thing I am, because alarms are sounding off for me.
Yeah.
And
well, the bad news is that, you know, Mike Rogers, who is broadly respected by his peers, is introducing something that's outrageous. That's the bad news. The good news is that there's no way that the Democrats will allow this to get through the Senate. It'll get filibustered.
I really hope not. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, you can calm down the panic attack, but, you know, just the fact that they're leading with this in this era of Trump, I agree with you. This is very, very troubling. Heather, I've got to move along, but thank you for the call. And thanks for the heads up on that. I was unaware of it. I appreciate it. Thank you for educating me. I've got the smartest listeners in the country. It's wonderful. Tom in Aptos, California. Am I saying it right, Tom?
Yes. Hi, Tom. I have an idea.
Mm-hmm.
I've been hearing talk lately about how Trump wants to publicize crimes that immigrants are committing in this country.
Yeah, his new voice program is a giant propaganda instrument to demonize a group of people the same way that Hitler did it with the Jews in the 30s.
Exactly. And I just thought of a way that I think we can counter that. What if someone were to come up with a website listing crimes that were committed against immigrants, and we can compare the two and see which ones actually look worse?
Well, the problem is that most immigrants, when crimes are committed against them, will not report those crimes. And, you know, maybe a year ago, you might have had maybe half of them would report it. I'm just pulling numbers out of my left ear here. I don't know what the actual numbers, but let's say it was half last year. You know, with all the anti-immigrant stuff that's been going around, that half is probably down to a tenth now. So you're not going to get accurate statistics.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. But even so, I think it might be worth something that would be worth looking at.
Yeah. Well, you know, there are statistics, Tom, and they're unambiguous. They're clear. You wouldn't know it from listening to Donald Trump, but there are statistics that show that immigrants are almost half as likely to commit a crime as our native-born Americans, as our American citizens.
Absolutely, I agree, and that's why I think that we need to offer some sort of a counterpoint to the propaganda that they're putting out that shows how ridiculous.
Well, that's a reasonable counterpoint in and of itself. I mean, nobody disagrees that if somebody commits a crime in this country and they're not in this country with documentation, that they should be forced to leave. I don't know of anybody who disagrees with that. But that's a whole different thing from, you know, demonizing immigrants, mass deportations, and everything else. I mean, that's the rational approach that arguably that President Obama was taking, that Hillary Clinton was advocating, and you know, it's like there's not a debate about that, except that, you know, for people who watch Fox so-called news and listen to right-wing hate radio, they believe in a completely alternative universe where, you know, immigrants are running roughshod over America, stealing everybody's job, raping everybody's women, murdering every, you know, et cetera, especially committing these crimes against, you know, God-fearing, good Christian white people. Tom, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of the news of the day, your calls and my thoughts on all of the above right after this. There's been very little discussion of Native Americans. And Native Americans are not only, you know, a minority in North America right now, but they were the original people here. We stole this country from them. We being white Europeans stole this country from Native Americans. And in the process of stealing the country, we slaughtered We robbed, we raped, we pillaged. The devastation in the name of God and manifest destiny and just plain old theft and greed of tribe after tribe after tribe across this country. One of the really amazing things to do when you come to Washington, D.C. to visit this beautiful city, the District of the Goddess, is to go to the Native American Museum. And you will get it. This country was fully occupied. Fully occupied. Coast to coast, top to bottom. There wasn't a spot, a habitable spot anyway, where you didn't have Native American communities. Now, they might have had in the more hostile areas, like the desert of Nevada, you had the Shoshone, where your population density was, 100 people per square mile. Whereas in what's now New Orleans, you had, a city. Right, the mound builders in the southeast, very fancy, large, sophisticated cities. So we had, there was there's extraordinary diversity in Native American communities across the United States, but they were stable, they were solid, they'd been here for 10 to 23,000 years. And we made every attempt to destroy their culture, to outlaw their languages, to murder them, to poison them, to give them infected blankets with smallpox. We killed off millions of them with influenza and syphilis and diseases that we brought with us from Europe. And now there is a Lakota prophecy that is being fulfilled that is scaring the living bejesus out of Lakota people in South Dakota. And I don't know if you saw this story in The Guardian. I've been reading The Guardian more and more as opposed to other newspapers, because it just does such a great job of both covering American news. They have a very, in fact, more The Guardian's a British-owned newspaper, but more Americans read The Guardian than Brits. It's one of many newspapers in Britain. It's one of the only in the United States, I think, that actually is not somebody's mouthpiece, And they have this extraordinary story at theguardian.com titled, "We Are the Protectors, Not Protesters. Why I'm Fighting the North Dakota Pipeline." And I just wanted to share with you some of this. This is from Iuskan American Horse, is his name. He lives in Cannonball, North Dakota. And here's what he has to say. This is important stuff. Our elders have told us that if the Zuzeska sape, also known as the black snake, comes across our land, our world will end. Zuzeska has come in the form of the Dakota Access Pipeline, and so I must fight it. I am Sikangu Ogallala Lakota, born in Rosebud, South Dakota, and writing from the front line of the movement against the pipeline in Cannonball. I have been holding this ground with my Standing Rock Sioux tribe relatives since the spring. I am defending the land and water of my people as my ancestors did before me. The $3.8 billion pipeline project is proposed to carry approximately 470,000 barrels a day of fracked oil from the Bakken oil fields, 1,172 miles through the country's heartland to Illinois. The pipeline will cross the confluence of the Cannonball and Missouri rivers, where it threatens to contaminate our primary source of drinking water and damage the bordering indigenous burial grounds, historic villages, and Sundance sites that surround the area in all directions. Those sites that were not desecrated when the area was flooded in 1948 by the construction of the Ojai Dam are now in danger again. This week, writes Iuskan American Horse in The Guardian, and I strongly recommend you check this article out. This week, I have witnessed pipeline construction tear its way toward the water of the Missouri River, which flow into the Mississippi, threatening to pollute the aquifer that carries drinking water to 10 million people. I have seen where their machines clawed through the earth that once held my relatives' villages. I have watched law enforcement officials protect the oil industry by dragging away my indigenous brothers and sisters who stood up for our people. The fact that Energy Transfer Partners, the company behind the pipeline, would use the word Dakota, which in our language means friend or ally, in the name of its project is disrespectful. This pipeline is a direct threat to all Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota people, especially our future generations. And we are not the only ones. We know that burning this oil is changing our climate, and indigenous people all over the world are bearing the brunt of the catastrophes that it causes.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. You too can buy a congressman. This is remarkable. Back on July of 2015, we did a daily take over on our TV show that is like, ever wonder what the best investment you can make is? The best investment you can make is buying a politician. Take the case of what Montana's fossil fuel companies invested in Representative Ryan Zinke. Now, this is the guy who was just this morning voted in by the Senate to be the Secretary of the Interior, the guy who oversees all our public lands. Back to my op-ed, or our op-ed. Troy helped write this, in fact, didn't you? Yeah. This was July 1st, 2015. This is almost 2 years ago, year and a half ago. Take the case of Montana's fossil fuel companies, what they invested in Representative Ryan Zinke. If the Obama administration closes a massive tax loophole that allows the companies to rip off the state, Montana's coal companies would be looking at a $19 million hit to their bottom line. You see, for years, Montana's coal producers had to pay royalties to the state of Montana for coal mined on federal land. But Montana's coal producers found a way to get around paying the royalty for the coal they took from public lands. It's been really easy so far. Take Peabody Coal. All they had to do is create shell subsidiaries to buy Peabody's coal at a lower than market rate. The state would only collect royalties on Peabody selling coal to its own subsidiary, basically at cost, so there's no profit and no royalty payments. Then the subsidiary would simply turn around and sell the coal again to an actual user like China or a power plant at a much higher and more profitable market rate. And the Obama Department of Interior had proposed a rule that would break that up, no more tax-free insider trading. But last week, Montana Representative at Large Ryan Zinke introduced a rider to the House budget bill that blocks the Obama administration's new rule on royalties, which means Ryan Zinke is churning out big returns for his fossil fuel companies' investors. And at what cost to them, you may ask? Well, according to OpenSecrets.org, oil, gas, and coal companies donated at least $43,000 to Zinke's campaign. That's more than 10% of his total contributions from PACs. And what are the companies getting in return? They're avoiding paying $19 million a year for taking the coal that you and me and the rest of America owns on the public lands. So over the last 2 years, they've made $38 million on a $43,000 investment in Ryan Zinke. So Ryan Zinke's investors are seeing a rate of return that's over 86,000%. So, you know, you watch, what's his name? The guy on TV who does the buy stock now, don't. Yeah, Jim Cramer. You watch the Jim Cramer show, and he's like, yeah, it's time to buy Microsoft. No, it's time to buy Apple. No, it's time to buy ExxonMobil. No, it's time to buy a congressman. You can make an 86,000% return on investment. Wait, what's that I hear? You're not a big corporation? Oh, I'm sorry. You can't buy a congressman. Well, if you're a billionaire, you can. You're not? Oh, well, I guess you're just going to have to invest your 401k in a, S&P index fund or something, because buying congressmen is only for rich people and corporations. Connie in Albuquerque, New Mexico, listening to KBQ. Hey, Connie, what's up?
Well, someone spoke earlier about the Americans having problems in Mexico with things heating up between Trump and of course, the people who are coming over here. Now, I'm Mexican. I was born here, and I have problems. I have problems of getting these weird looks from white people who look at me and like what the hell you're doing here kind of thing. You know, it's becoming more and more often. And recently, I went to the grocery store, bought my groceries, got in line, and the woman turned around and told me, "Are you stalking me?" And I was so surprised. I said, "Yes." And I mean, she totally, you know, I was concentrated on getting out of the place and going home. And she started coming up with all kinds of things. You know, came up with the fact that there was cartels and there's this and that, and the people, that's the fault of the parents, and these poor people have to work here and as checkout people and blah, blah, blah. And she called them kids. And there would happen to be a checker who was stalking the end caps of where you check out at. And he says, "Well, I'm not a kid." And she looked at him and she ignored him, and she was going on. I mean, and
wow.
I just ignored her, put my things on it there. I wanted to get out of there. And she went on, and then she brought up curanderas, or witchcraft and stuff like that. And I thought, whoa.
This woman has been watching too much Fox News.
Yeah.
I'm serious.
But I have noticed there's an increased looks that say, you know, what are you doing here type of look. Right. And when I have to go up to the Midwest, because I do have relatives there, it's even worse.
Mm. Wow. So you're seeing, Connie, you look Hispanic, you look Mexican, because that's your ancestry. And you're finding that there's been a dramatic increase in basically racism, whether it's microaggression, you know, just the kind of look, or whether it's the you know, right in your face like that woman was. Did this start with the primaries? Did it start with the Trump election? Did it start with the inauguration?
I have lived all over the United States.
How, is this consequentially different from your experience, say, 2 years ago?
Yes. In the past year, it's gotten so much worse.
In the past year. Wow.
Yes.
Connie, I'm so sorry.
Also, let me tell you something. I've lived in the South, the East Coast, up in near the Gulf, in Michigan, Kansas, Colorado, California. This happens to be the most ill-feeling atmosphere I've ever lived in.
Wow.
And I've been here for quite a while. Yeah. It wasn't too bad. I mean, it was, you know, it wasn't at all what I had expected this place to be. But it. You're
talking about Albuquerque?
Yeah, I have seen it increase in that kind of area where you are looked at, and you know, it's. I was driving in where I live in the residential area, and I got a phone call, and I was expecting it, but I don't drive and, you know, use my phone at all. Right. So I parked at the park, and this woman saw me. She walked, you know, near my car, and then whipped out her camera and was taking pictures of me.
Oh my!
And I was looking at her like, what the heck?
Yeah.
You know. And so, I mean, it's not, you know, even though we have a huge percentage of Hispanic people here, it really doesn't make any difference.
Yeah. You know, what's really extraordinary about that, Connie, is that prior to the Mexican-American War, you know, James Polk in the 1840s, prior to that, New Mexico, Arizona, and Southern California were Mexico. And,
I know.
And people of your ancestry occupied the entire thing. So the white people are the invaders. I mean, it's amazing. It's really,
I remember living in Colorado, being very young, seeing a cross in this village I lived in. It was a mining village. We lived right in front of the highest point in the village area. And I was very young. I was only 4 or 5, maybe.
Connie, I'm going to have to ask you to call again and tell us that story. We're just out of time. Thank you for
You're
the call.
listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I'm really sorry, Connie. Once that break starts, I can't stop it. We will be back. It's coming up on 15 minutes before the hour. And welcome back. Dave in Seattle watching us on YouTube. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, I just wanted to say, based on the other lady's call, the last two illegal immigrant friends I had, one guy walked here from Ecuador.
Whoa.
100 feet.
Walked here from Ecuador?
He walked from Guayaquil, Ecuador.
That's like 1,000 miles.
Yeah, after he saved up $3,000 to bribe the Mexican border guards.
Wow.
To get him over the fence, by the way.
Right. Wow.
Right. So nobody was looking for him. Yeah. And the other guy was a refugee from Sri Lanka. He left his house in the middle of the night as people were being dragged out and houses were being set on fire. So that's what a refugee is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And both of them. I mean, so anyway, I just wanted to say, we saw last night Trump, who's got a lot of experience with pro wrestling and other cons, do the thing that I've been dreading, which is the turn. When he goes from heel to face, as they call it, from the bad guy to the good guy, talking about the dreamers and all this money that the Republicans are supposedly going to spend on infrastructure that they didn't spend during the Bush administration.
Right.
I mean...
Or during Obama, Democrats Nancy Pelosi got an appropriations bill that included a huge infrastructure improvement, and it was filibustered by Republicans in the Senate. She got legislation passed that did away with tax cuts and tax breaks for companies that export jobs and replaced them with tax cuts and tax breaks for companies who are going to bring those jobs back to the United States. It passed the House. It was filibustered by Republicans in the Senate. They are now talking about doing those things, but these are Democratic ideas, not Republican ideas.
Of course they are. I was wondering I read the transcript of the speech because, of course, I can't watch it. And I said, well, which Democrat gave this speech?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's astonishing.
Yeah, it really is. And watching it, I mean, there were times where you saw, Paul Ryan rubbing his jaw, the kind of, I'm not sure about that kind of body language, and times when he wasn't applauding. For example, when Trump said we took down TPP, Paul Ryan didn't even bother to applaud. Because stopping TPP was a Democratic move. Stopping NAFTA was a Democratic move. Stopping all these trade deals. Democrats have been on the right side of all these trade deals. Dave, thanks for the call. Excellent points all. Thank you. Paula in Taft, Texas. Hey, Paula, we just have a minute to the break. A quick one?
Yeah, my question is, would you please explain what you mean by fascism in the contemporary format,
sure,
as opposed to the Italian?
Yeah. Henry Wallace, if you plug into a search engine, Henry Wallace, 1944, New York Times and fascism, you will find an article that he wrote in the New York Times in 1944 in which he said that fascism is the American fascists are those who seek to take the instruments of political power and combine them with the economic power acquired by corporate power, and together deprive the average working person of a decent living. Basically, they want to combine the corporate power with state power. And that was 1944. He was warning against it, and everybody said, oh, Henry, you're being an alarmist. He was vice president of the United States. Oh, you're being an alarmist. Well, it turns out here we are. This is, by Henry Wallace's definitions, we are fully in a fascist state right now. And by the way, that was Mussolini's definition as well. He dissolved the parliament and replaced it with the Cameo de Fascistio Corporaciones, the Chamber of Fascist Corporations. Every elected representative was replaced by a representative from the biggest corporation in each of those equivalent of a congressional districts. So, here we are. Ryan Zinke, Paula, thank you. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Brenda in Fairfield, California, listening on Sirius XM. Hey, Brenda, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Hey, I just want to piggyback on what Connie said about her experiences now after Trump and how she's being treated. I just want to tell her, or rather welcome her to the reality of African Americans in this country. We have been dealing with those type of looks. We have been dealing with those type of feelings for forever.
Yeah.
And it just really bothers me because even I have from Spanish, from Mexican Americans, or even just Mexicans or immigrants from this country have even treated me as badly as she is being treated by white Americans.
Wow. You're an African American woman.
I'm sorry?
You're an African American woman.
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Yes, I've been treated by Spanish.
Yeah, your phone is breaking up, Brenda.
Okay, I'm sorry. I have been treated that way for quite a while from all sorts of immigrants that have come to America.
Yeah. I'm so sorry for your experience too, Brenda. We've got to figure out a way to excise this cancer, and it's not just a cancer of racism. It's a cancer of white supremacy, and male supremacy for that matter. And both of these, white men seem to think that this is a wonderful thing. It's not. It's not even a good thing for white men, much less anybody else. And it will destroy our country if we do not do something about it. And Donald Trump is pouring gasoline on this fire on a daily basis, and that's terrible. Brenda, thank you for sharing your story with us. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the courage it took to call and share it. Thank you. Mark in Roberta, Georgia. Hey, Mark, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind?
Hello, I'd just like to talk about Jeff Sessions' comments about marijuana and opiates. I had spinal surgery back in 2010, and after that, my doctor gave me hydrocodone, 4 to 6 10-milligram pills for 4 years to take for my problems. And then in 13, when they changed all the laws and the doctors are basically limited to how much they could actually prescribe, he just cut me off of them cold turkey and told me to take Tylenol and Prevacid.
Right.
And anyway, so I talked to some friends because I was having a lot of problems, and they suggested to try marijuana, so I did. And it actually helped me get through all of the withdrawals, and it made it where I could sleep and really put me back into a productive part of life. So I let my doctor know, hey, this has really helped me out. And then the doctor, who had been my doctor for 20 years since I was a teenager, basically told me I had 30 days to find another doctor because he wasn't going to deal with anybody who took illegal drugs.
Oh, man. That is
but it works. So.
That is shocking. Yeah, it does. It absolutely does work. And what's happening, it's sort of like, people say, how did gay marriage happen so fast? It happened so fast because it became safe, relatively safe, to come out to family and friends. And all across the country, people started coming out. And as they came out, people realized, hey, I've got gay people in my family. I had no idea. I guess I'm not going to be such a hard ass on gay marriage. And the same thing is happening with medical marijuana. People are discovering friends and neighbors and acquaintances who are using medical marijuana, and they're not potheads and stoners, and they're not, which is not to say that there's anything wrong with being a pothead or a stoner, but frankly, it's much preferable to being a drunk, in my opinion. It's certainly less destructive to your body. But this is where I think Jeff Sessions and Donald Trump are going to run into a brick wall, because the people get it, that this stuff actually works, it actually helps, and they're not going to put up with any more of this BS from Jeff Sessions, who's just trying to jack more dollars for the so-called war on drugs into the system. Mark, thanks for sharing your story with us. I appreciate it. Augie in Sarasota, Florida. Hey, Augie, what's on your mind today?
Tom, this is my first time to get into you, but I just want to tell you that Ronald Reagan had to be right. Government's the problem, not the solution. He had to defund government to prove that, and he inherited a government that had no debt. Poor Jimmy Carter got blamed for everything except leaving a balanced budget that Reagan promised.
Right.
Tom,
Yeah, just for the record, Augie, the last two presidents to have a balanced budget were Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton. Right. Back to you.
Yeah, well, Eisenhower's a guy that followed FDR. Wouldn't hire anybody who would not be part of the New Deal.
Right.
And he had a 91% marginal tax rate, and he built our interstate highway system much in the way I think that Lincoln intended with the Transcontinental Railroad, and of course ending the Civil War. So the two great builders of our country, or two of the greatest, are ignored for this clown called Reagan and now this new clown called Trump.
Yep.
I mean, it's bizarre. I don't know what to make of people's thinking, but I guess, when money is cheap and you don't borrow it, you're doomed to wait for the money to get expensive. I mean, to not do the infrastructure and put high-speed rail and modernize this country, the thing that's dangerous for this country is for Trump to really do that some way.
Well, he's already, one of the first things he did in office was kill high-speed rail in California. He cut off the federal matching funds for it and killed this high-speed rail project. It's actually killed 2 high-speed rail projects in California. And it was like, punishment. California had most of the 3 million additional votes that Hillary Clinton won over Donald Trump, or at least 1 million of them. I mean, they were scattered all over the country. Hillary Clinton overwhelmingly won the White House if you're looking at the popular vote. And Trump knows that. But I think it's also, hey, if anything can be done by government, it has to be, instead, the Republican mantra is we've got to figure out a way that some billionaire can make a profit off it. Augie, thanks for the call. It's spot on. Dave in Radcliffe, Kentucky, listening on Sirius. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Yeah, hey, Tom, I got a question because I understand all of Donald Trump's little racist cues. I mean, I get the subtext. And like last night during his speech when he said he used the word savage, okay? I mean, that I heard that a lot from racists in the Department of Defense. They love that term. But anyways, what I don't get is the subtext on the extraordinary subtext on the nationalism and the sovereignty stuff. I mean, to me, Trump just sounds like a regular right-winger. But I'm asking you, is there something extraordinary there that I'm missing?
No, what you're hearing, and there's some legitimacy to this, by the way. What you're hearing is a pushback against neoliberalism, which really came into its full birth with Reagan and Reaganism, but to some extent has been embraced by the Democratic Party as well, which is the idea of internationalism, of no border. It's sort of the debate I had with Charles Sauer in the second hour of the program. The Schengen Agreement in the European Union. Now there's that's being pushed back against. Our own version of that would be NAFTA, and people are saying, hey, wait a minute, what about the United States? We're running a $600-700 billion a year trade deficit. Prior to the Reagan administration, the United States had never had a trade deficit. We were when Ronald Reagan came into office, we were the world's largest creditor. We had never been the world's debtor, and we were the world's largest exporter of manufactured goods. We imported raw materials, we brought in iron ore, we manufactured steel and finished products, and we exported washing machines and cars and TV sets. When Reagan left, 8 years later, in just 8 years, by tripling the national debt, Reagan and we're declaring war on unions and opening the door to mergers and acquisitions and to so-called free trade. Reagan took us from being the biggest creditor in the world to literally being the biggest debtor in the world. And he took us from being the largest exporter of raw materials, to the definition of a first world country, to being the world's largest importer of finished goods and the world's largest exporter of raw materials, which is the definition of a third world country. That's the damage that Reaganomics and neoliberalism have done to us. And people are pushing back against that. And Trump gets that. That's the one thing that Bannon has figured out. Now, they're doing it in a way that is filled with race baiting and hate and is insanely destructive. But it's a message that you'll find in both parties. It's time to push back on neoliberalism. And it's a message, broadly speaking, in a healthy way, with which I'd agree. I just say that Trump is doing it in a sick way. Don't forget, democracy requires you. Tag you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by EcoWine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, EcoWine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com.